Roald Dahl, the BFG, read by Hosea Tong Ho. The Witching Hour. Sophie couldn't sleep. A brilliant moonbeam was slanting through a gap in the curtains. It was shining right onto her pillow. The other children in the dormitory had been asleep for hours. Sophie closed her eyes and lay quiet still. She tried very hard to doze off. It was no good. The moonbeam was like a silver blade slicing through the room onto her face. The house was absolutely silent. No voices came up from downstairs. There were no footsteps on the floor above either. The window behind the curtains were wide open, but nobody was walking on the pavement outside. No cars went by on the street. Not the tiniest sound could be heard anywhere. Sophie had never known such a silence. Perhaps she told herself this is what they called the witching hour. The witching hour. Somebody had once whispered to her. This was a special moment in the middle of the night to her, when every child and every grown-up was in a deep, deep sleep, and all the dark things came out from hiding and had the world to themselves. The moonbeam was brighter than ever on Sophie's pillow. She had decided to get out of bed and close the gap in the curtains. You got punished if you were caught out of bed after lights out, even if you said you had to go to the laboratory. That was not accepted as an excuse, and they were punished just the same. But there was no one about now, but Sophie. Sophie was sure of that. She reached out for her glasses that lay on the chair beside her bed. They had steel rims and very thick lenses, and she could hardly see a thing without them. She put them on, then slipped them out of the bed and tiptoed to her windows. When she reached the curtains, Sophie hesitated. She long reached to duck underneath them and lean out to the window to see what the world looked like now that the witching hour was at hand. She listened again. Everywhere it was deathly still. The longing to look out became so strong she couldn't resist it. Quickly, she ducked under the curtains and leaned out the window. In the silvery moonlight, the village street she knew so well became completely different. The houses looked bent and crooked like houses in a fairy tale. Everything was pale and ghostly and milky white. Across the road, she could see Mrs. Rance's shop, where you bought buttons and wools and a bit of elastic. It didn't look so real. There was something dim and misty about that too. Sophie allowed her eye to travel further and further down the street. Suddenly, she froze. There was something coming up from the opposite side. It was something black, something tall and black, something very tall and very black and very thin. Who? It wasn't a human. It couldn't be. It was 4 times as tall as the tallest human. It was so tall, its head was higher than the upstairs windows of the houses. Sophie opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Her throat, like her whole body, was frozen with fright. This was the witching hour, all right. The tall black figure was coming right her way. It was keeping very close to the houses across the street, hiding in the shadowy places where there was no moonlight. On it and on it came, nearer and nearer, but it was moving in spurts. It would stop, then it would move, then it would stop again. What on earth was it? Aha! Sophie could see it now. What it was up to? It was stopping in front of each house. It would stop and peer into the upstairs window of each house in the secret street. It actually paid attention and had to bend down to peer into the upstairs windows. That's how tall it was. It would stop and peer in. Then it would slide on to the next house and stop again, and peer in, and so on, all along the street. It was much closer now, and Sophie could see it more clearly. Looking at it, she decided it had to become some kind of person. Obviously, it wasn't a human, but it was definitely a person. A giant person, perhaps. Sophie stared hard across the misty moonlight street. A giant, if that was what he was wearing a long black cloak. In one hand he was holding what looked like a very long thin trumpet. In the other hand he had a large suitcase. The giant had stopped right now in front of Mr. and Mrs. Gucci's house. The Gucci's had a green grocer's shop in the middle of a high street, and the family lived above the shop. The 2 Gucci's children slept in the upstairs front window. Sophie knew that. A giant was peering through the window in the room when Michael and Jane went grocery shopping. From across the street, Sophie watched and held her breath. She saw the giant sit back in a pace and put the suitcase down on the pavement. He bent over and opened the suitcase. He took something out of it. It looked like a glass jar, one of those square ones with a screw top. He unscrewed the top of the jar and poured something in that was in the end of a long trumpet thing. Sophie watched, trembling. She saw the giant straighten up again, and she saw him poke the trumpet in through the upstairs window of the room where the Gucci children were sleeping. She saw the giant take a deep breath and hoof. He blew through the trumpet. No noise came out, but it was so obvious to Sophie that whatever had been in the jar had now been blown through the trumpet into the Goosey's children's bedroom. What could it be? As the giant withdrew the trumpet from the window and bent down to pick up the suitcase, he happened to turn his head and glance across the street. In the moonlight, Sophie caught a glimpse of an enormous, long, paley, wrinkly face with the most enormous ears. The nose was as sharp as a knife, and above the nose there were two bright, flashy eyes, and the eyes were staring straight at Sophie. There was a fierce and devilish look about them. Sophie gave a yelp and pulled back from the window. She flew across the dormitory and jumped into her bed and hid under the blanket. And there she crouched, still as a mouse, tingling all over her. Under the blanket, Sophie waited. After a minute or so, she lifted a corner of the blanket and peeped out. For the second time that night, her blood froze to the ice, and she wanted to scream, but no sound came out. There at the windows, with the curtains pushed aside, was the enormous, long, palely, wrinkly face of the giant person, staring in. The flashing black eyes were fixed on Sophie's bed. The next moment, a huge hand with pale fingers came sneaking in through the windows. This was followed by an arm as thick as a tree trunk, and the arm, the hand, the fingers were reaching out across the room towards Sophie's bed. This time Sophie really did scream, but only for a second, before very quickly the hand clamped down over her blanket and the scream was smothered by the bedclothes. Sophie crouched underneath the blanket, felt strong fingers grasping hold of her, and then she was lifted up from her bed, blanket and all, and whisked out of the window. If you can think of anything more terrifying than that happening to you in the middle of the night, then let's hear about it. The awful thing was that Sophie knew exactly what was going on, although she couldn't see it happening. She knew that a monster with an enormous, long, pale, wrinkly face and dangerous eyes had plucked her from her bed in the middle of the night, witching hour, and now was carrying her out through the window smothered in a blanket. What actually happened next was this. When the giant had got Sophie outside, he arranged a basket so he could grasp her from all four corners of it at once in one of her huge hands. With Sophie imprisoned inside the other hand, he seized a suitcase and the long trumpet thing, and off he ran. Sophie, by squirming around inside the blanket, managed to push the top of her head out through a little gap just below the giant's head. She stared around. She saw the village houses rushing by on both sides. A giant was sprinting down the highway. He was running so fast, his black coat was streaming out behind him like the wings of a bird. Each stride he took was as long as a tennis court. Out on the village he ran, and soon they were racing across the moonlit fields. The hedges dividing the fields were no big problem for giants. He simply strode over them, and a wide river appeared to his path. He crossed in one flying stride. Sophie crouched on the blanket and peered out. She was being dumped along the giant's leg like a sack of potatoes. Over the fields, the hedges and rivers they went, and after a while a frightening thought came across in Sophie's head. The giant is running fast, she told herself, because he is hungry and he wants to go home as quickly as possible, and then he'll have me for him for his breakfast. The cave. The giant ran on, but now a curious change took place in his way of running. He seemed suddenly to go into a higher rear. Fast and faster he went, and soon he was travelling at such a speed the landscape became blurred. The wind stung Sophie's cheeks. It made her eyes water. It whipped her hair black and whistled in her ears. She could no longer feel the giant's feet touching the ground. She had a weird sensation they were flying. It was impossible to tell whether they were over land or sea. The giant had some sort of magic in his legs. The wind rushed against Sophie's face, and it became so strong that she had to duck down again in the blanket to prevent her head from being blown away. Was it really possible that they were crossing oceans? It certainly felt that way to Sophie. She crouched in the blanket and listened to the howling of the wind. It went on for hours, and it seemed like that. Then all at once the wind stopped its howling. The pace began to slow down. Sophie could feel the giant's feet pounding once again over the earth. She poked her head out of the blanket to have a look. They were in a country of thick forests and rushing rivers. The giant had definitely slowed down and was now running more normally. Although normal was a silly word to use to describe a galloping giant. He leaped over a dozen of rivers. He went rushing through a great forest. Then down into the valley, up over a range of hills as bare as concrete, and soon he was galloping over a desolate wasteland that was not quite of this earth. The ground was flat, pale yellow. Great lumps of blue rock were scattered around the dead trees and stood everywhere, like skeletons. The moon had long since disappeared, and now dawn was breaking. Sophie, still peering out from the blanket, saw suddenly ahead of her a great craggy mountain. The mountain was dark blue, and all around it was sky. Bits of pale gold were gushing and glistening with light. Right beneath the mountain, the giant stopped. He was puffing mightily. His great chest was heaving in and out. He paused to catch his breath. Directly in front of them, lying against the side of the mountain, Sophie could see a massive round stone. It was as big as a house. The giant reached out and rolled the stone to one side, as easily as if it had been a football, and now, where the stone had been, there appeared a vast black hole. The hole was so large that the giant didn't even have to duck his head as he went in. He strolled into the black hole, still carrying Sophie in one hand, and the suitcase in the other, and the trumpet. As soon as he was inside, he stopped and turned, and rolled the great stone back into place, so the entrance to his cave was completely hidden from the outside. Now, the entrance had been sealed up, and there was not a glint of light inside the cave. All was black. Sophie felt herself being lowered onto the ground. Then the giant let go of her blanket completely. His footsteps moved further and further away. Sophie sat there in the dark, shivering with fear. "He is getting ready to eat me," she told herself. "He will probably eat me, just as raw as I am, or perhaps he will boil me first. Or will he fry me? He will drop me like a rasher of bacon into some gigantic frying pan, sizzling with fat." A blaze of light suddenly lit up the whole place. Sophie blinked and stared. She saw an enormous cave with a rocky roof. The walls on either side were lined with shelves, and on the shelves there stood rows upon rows of glass jars. There were jars everywhere. They were piled up in the corners. They filled up every nook of the cranny of the cave. In the middle of the floor there was a table, 12 feet high, and a chair to match it. The giant took off his black coat and hung it against the wall. Sophie saw that under the cloak he was wearing a sort of colourless shirt and a dark old leather waistcoat that didn't seem to have any buttons. His trousers were faded green and were far too short on the legs. On his bare feet he was wearing a pair of ridiculous sandals, and they was, for some reason, had holes cut out along each side, with a large hole on the end where his shoes stuck out. Sophie crouched on the floor of the cave, and the nightie gazed back at him through steel-rimmed glasses. She was trembling like a leaf of the wind, and a finger of ice was running up and down the length of her spine. "Ha!" shouted the giant, walking forward and rubbing his hands together. "What has us got here?" His booming voice rolled along the walls like the cave, a burst of thunder. The BFG. The giant picked up the trembling Sophie with one hand and carried her across the cave and put her on the table. "Now he really is going to eat me," Sophie thought. Now the giant sat down and stared hard at Sophie. He had truly enormous ears. Each one was as big as the wheel of a truck, and he seemed to be able to move them inwards and outwards from his head as he wished. "I is hungry," the giant boomed. He grinned, showing massive square teeth. The teeth were very white and very square, and they had sat in the mouth like a huge slice of white bread. "But please don't eat me," Sophie stammered. The giant let out a bellow of laughter. "Just because I is a giant, you think I is a man-gobbling cannibal?" he shouted. "You's about right. Giants is all cannibal-y and pitiful, and they does gobble up human beings. We is in a giant country now. Giants is everywhere around. Out there, us has the famous bone-crunching giant. Bone-crunching giant crunches up 2 whiffling human beings for supper every night. Noise is air-bursting. Noise of crunching bones go crackety-crack for miles around." "Ouch," Sophie said. "Bone-crunching giant only gobbles up human beings from Turkey," the giant said. "Every night, Bone Cruncher is galloping off to Turkey to gobble Turks." Sophie's sense of patriotism was suddenly so bruised by this remark that she became quite angry. "Why Turk?" she blurted out. "What's wrong with the English?" Bone-crunching giant says Turks is tasty. Oh, ever so much juicier and more scrumptiously scrumptious. Bone Cruncher says Turkish humans beans has a glamorous flavor, he says. Turks from Turkey is tasting on turkey. I suppose they would, Sophie said. Of course they would, the giant shouted. Every human bean is deadly and different. Some is scrumptious, and some is uglyish. Greeks is and full of uglyish. No giant is eating Greeks ever. Why not? Sophie asked. Greeks from Greece is all greasy, the giant said. I imagine that's possible too, Sophie said. She was wondering with a bit of tremble what this talking about eating people was leading up to. Whatever happened, she simply must play along with his peculiar and small as his jokes. And smile at them too. But were they jokes? Perhaps the great brute was just working up an appetite by talking about food. As I'm saying, the giant went on, all human beings is having different flavors. Human beings from Panama is tasting of very strong hats. Why hats? Sophie said. You is not very clear, the giant said, moving his great ears in and out. I thought all human beings is full of brains, but your head is emptied than a bundigle. Do you like vegetables? Sophie asked, hoping to steer the conversation towards a slightly little less dangerous kind of food. You is trying to change the subject, the giant said sternly. We is having an interesting babblement about the taste of human being. The human being is not a vegetable. Oh, but the bean is a vegetable, Sophie said. Not the human being, the giant said. The human being has 2 legs and a vegetable has no legs at all. Sophie didn't argue anymore. The last thing she wanted to do was make the giant cross. The human being, the giant went on, is coming in billions of different flavors. For instance, the human being from Wales is really whooshy, or fish. There's something very fishy about Wales. You mean Wales? Sophie said. Wales is something quite different. Wales is Wales, the giant said. Don't gobble fuck around with words. I'll now give you another example. Human beings from Jersey has the most disgustable woolly tickle on their tongue, the giant said. Human beings from Jersey is tasting of cardigans. Jerseys. You mean jerseys? Sophie said. You are once again gobble funking, the giant shouted. Don't do it. This is a serious and snitching subject. May I continue? Please do, Sophie said. Danes from Denmark is tasting so much ever of dogs, the giant went on. Of course, they taste of great Danes. They taste of great Danes. Wrong, cried the giant, slapping his thigh. Danes from Denmark is tasting doggy. They is tasting of Labradors. Then, what do the people of Labrador taste of? Sophie asked. Danes, the giant cried triumphantly. Great Danes. Aren't you getting a bit mixed up? Sophie said. I is a very mixed up giant, the giant said. But I does my best. And I is not nearly as mixed up as the other giant. I know one who gallops all the way to Wellington for his supper. Wellington? Sophie said. Where's Wellington? Your head is full of squash flies, the giant said. Wellington is in New Zealand. The human beings in Wellington has an especially scribbly, scrumptious taste. So says the Wally-eating giant. What do the people of Wellington taste of? Sophie asked. Boots, the giant said. Of course, Sophie said. I should have known. Sophie decided that this conversation has now gone on long enough. If she was going to act any more, she was going to be eaten. She would rather get it over and done with right away than be kept hanging around any more. What sort of human beings do you eat? She asked, trembling. Me? Shouted the giant in his mighty voice, making the glass jars rattle on the shelves. Me gobbling up human beings. This is I never. The other, yes. All the other is gobbling them up every night, but not me. I is a freaky giant. I is a nice and jumpy giant. I is the only nice and jumbly giant in the giant country. I is the big friendly giant. I is the BFG. What is your name? My name is Sophie, Sophie said, hardly daring to believe the good news she had just heard. The giants. But if you are so nice and friendly, Sophie said, then why did you snatch me from my bed and run away with me? Because you saw me, the big friendly giant answered. If anyone has ever seen a giant, he or she must be taken away hip switch. Why? Asked Sophie. Well, first of all, said the BFG, human beings is not really believing in giants, is they? Human beings is not thinking we exist. I do, Sophie said. Ah, but that was only because you've seen me, cried out the BFG. I cannot possibly allow anyone, even little girls, to be seeing me and staying at home. The first thing you would be doing, you would be scuttling around, yodeling the news that you were actually seeing a giant, and then a great giant hunt, a mighty giant look-see, would be starting up all over the world, with the human beings all rummaging of all the great giants you saw and getting wildly excited. People would be coming rushing and bushing after me with goodness knows what, and they would be catching me and locking me into a cage to be stared at. They would be putting me into a zoo of a bunker mouse with all the squiggling, hiddalumpings, and quadwalklings. Sophie knew what the giant said was true. If any person reported actually having seen a giant haunting the trees and the streets of the town at night, there would be most certainly a terrific hullabaloo across the world. I will bet you, the BFG went on, that you would have been splashing the news all over the wonky world, wouldn't you, if I hadn't wiggled you away? I suppose I would, Sophie said. And that would never do, said the BFG. So, what will happen to me now? Sophie asked. If you do go back, you will be telling the world, said the BFG. Most likely on telling that tally, bunkum box, and the radio squeaker. So you will just have to be staying here with me for the rest of your life. Oh no, Sophie cried. Oh yes, said the BFG, but I'm warning you not ever to go whiffling about out of this cave without I wish you, or you will be coming to an mucky end. I showing you now who is going to eat you up if they is ever catching even one little glimpse of you. The big friendly giant picked Sophie off the table and carried her to the cave entrance. He rolled the huge stone to one side and said, Peep out over there, little girl, and tell me what you see. Sophie, sitting on the BFG's hand, peeped out this cave. The sun was up now, and shining fiery hot over the great yellow wasteland, with its blue rocks and over dead trees. Is you seeing them? The BFG asked. Sophie, squinting through the glare of the sun, saw several tremendous, tall figures moving along the rocks, about 500 yards away. 3 or 4 others were sitting quite motionlessly on the rocks themselves. This is a giant country, the BFG said. This is all giants, everyone. It was a brain-boggling sight. The giants were all naked, except for a sort of short skirt around their waists, and their skins were burnt by the sun. But it was the sheer size of each one of them that boggled Sophie's brain most of all. They were simply colossal, for taller and wider than the big friendly giant upon whose hand she was now sitting, and oh how ugly they were. Many of them had large bellies, all of them had large arms and feet. They were far too far away for their faces to be seen clearly, and perhaps that was a good thing. What on earth are they doing? Sophie asked. Nothing, said the BFG. They is just moochling and foochling around and waiting for the night to come. Then they will be galloping off to a place where people is living to find their support. You mean Turkey? Sophie said. Bone crunching giant will be galloping to Turkey, of course, said the BFG. But the others will be whiffling off to all sorts of flung away places like Wellington for the booty flavor and Panama for the hatty taste. Every giant is having their own favorite food hunting ground. Did they ever go to England? Sophie asked. Often, said the BFG. They say the English is tasting ever so wonderfully of quarter scallop. I'm not so sure I quite know what that means, Sophie said. Meanings is not important, said the BFG. I cannot be right all the time. Quite often, I is left instead of right. And are all those beastly giants over there really going off again tonight to eat people? Sophie asked. All of them is guzzling human beings every night, the BFG said. All of them except me. That is why you will be becoming an mucky end if any of them should ever get you to see your gogglers upon you. You would be swallowed up like a piece of pumpkin pie, all in one dollop. But eating people is horrible, Sophie cried. It's frightful. Why doesn't someone stop them? And who, please, is going to stop them? Asked the BFG. Couldn't you? Said Sophie. Never in a pig's whistle, cried the BFG. All of those man-eating giants is enormous and very fierce. They is all at least 2 times my wideness and double my royal highness. Twice as high as you, cried Sophie. Easily that, said the BFG. You is seeing them in the distance, but just wait till you get up close. Those giants is at least 50 feet tall, with huge muscles and cockles alive-o. I is the itchy one. I is the runt. 24 feet is Pundunut in the giant country. You mustn't feel bad about it, Sophie said. I think you are just great. Why, even your toes must be as big as sausages. Bigger, said the BFG, looking pleased.
This is as big as a Bufflehammer's. How many giants are there out there? Sophie asked. 9 altogether, answered the BFG. That means, Sophie said, that somewhere in the world, every single night, 9 rich people get carried away and eaten alive. More, said the BFG. It all depends, you see, on how big the human beings is. Japanese beings is very small, so a giant will need to gobble up about 6 Japanese before he is feeling full up. Others like Norway people and the Yankee Doodles is ever being so much bigger, and usually 2 or 3 of those makes a good tuck-in. But do these disgusting giants go to every single country in the world? Sophie asked. All countries except Greece. It is getting visited some time or another, the BFG answered. The country which a giant visits is depending on how he or she feels. If it is very warm, and the giant is feeling as hot as a saucepan, he will probably go galloping far up to the Frisbee North to get himself an Eskimo or 2 to cool him down. A nice fat Eskimo to a giant is like a lovely ice cream lolly to you. I take your word for it, Sophie said. And then once again, if it is frosty night and the giant is fridgy with cold, he'll probably point his nose towards the sweltering hotland to guzzle a few Hottentots hots to warm him up. How perfectly horrible, Sophie said. Nothing hots a cold giant up like a Hottentot, the BFG said. And if you were to put me down on the ground and I was to walk out among them now, Sophie said, would they really eat me up? Like a wisp-whittle, cried the BFG. And what is more, you were so small they couldn't even have to chew you. The first one to see you would pick you up in his fingers, and down you go like a drop of drain of water. Let's go back inside, Sophie said. I hate even watching them. The marvelous is. Back in the cave, the big friendly giant sat Sophie down once again at an enormous table. Is you quite snugly there in your nightie? He asked. You isn't frigid cold? I'm fine, Sophie said. I cannot help thinking, said the BFG, about your poor mother and father. But now they must be dripping and scumping all over the house shouting, Hello, 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 where's Sophie gone? I don't have a mother and father, Sophie said. They both died when I was a baby. Oh, you poor little scrumplers, cried the BFG. Is you not missing them very badly? Not really, Sophie said, because I never knew them. You was making me sad, the BFG said, rubbing his eyes. Don't be sad, Sophie said. No one is going to be worrying too much about me. That place you took me from, the village orphanage. We are all orphans in there. You is an orphan? Yes. How many is there in there? 10 of us, Sophie said, all little girls. Was you happy that the BFG asked? I hated it, Sophie said. The woman who ran it was called Mrs. Clonkers, and if she caught you breaking any of the rules, like getting out of bed at night or not folding up your clothes, you got punished. How is you getting punished? She locked us in the dark cellar for a day and a night without anything to eat or drink. That rotten old road trasper, cried the BFG. It was horrid, Sophie said. We used to dread it. There were rats down there. We could hear them creeping out. That filthy old frizzwigger, shouted the BFG. That is the most horrendous thing I've ever learned in years. You's making me sadder than ever. All at once, a huge tear came down that would have filled a bucket, rolled down one of the BFG's eyes, and fell with a splash on the floor. It made quite a puddle. Sophie watched with astonishment. What a strange and moody creature this is, she thought. One moment he is telling me my head is full of squash flies, and the next his heart is melting for me. And the next Mrs. Clonkers and his heart is melting for me because Mrs. Clonkers locks us in a cellar. The thing that worries me, Sophie said, is having to stay in a dreadful place for the rest of my life. The orphanage was pretty awful. But I wouldn't have been there forever, would I? All is my fault, the BFG said. I is the one who kidnaps you. Yet another enormous tear welled from his eyes and splashed onto the floor. Now that I think about it, I won't actually be here for all that long, Sophie said. I is afraid you will, the BFG said. No, I won't, Sophie said. Those brutes out there are bound to catch me sooner or later and have me for tea. I is never letting that happen, the BFG said. For a few moments the cave was silent, and Sophie said, May I ask you a question? The BFG wiped the tears from his eyes with the back of his hand and gave Sophie a long, thoughtful stare. Shoot away, he said. Would you please tell me what you were doing in our village last night? Why were you poking that long trumpet into the Grooshi's children's bedroom and then blowing through it? Aha! Cried the BFG, sitting up suddenly in his chair. Now we is getting nosier than a Parker. And the suitcase you were carrying, Sophie said. What on earth was that all about? The BFG stared suspiciously at the small girl sitting cross-legged on the table. "You as a girl, me to tell you the whoopsie big secrets," he said. "Secrets that nobody's ever hearing before. I won't tell a soul," Sophie said. "I swear it. How could I, anyways? I am stuck here for the rest of my life." "You could be telling the other giants." "No, I couldn't," Sophie said. "You told me they would eat me up the moment they saw me." "And so they would," said the BFG. "You're a human being, and human beings is like strawbunkles and a cream to those giants. If they're gonna eat me the moment they see me, then I wouldn't have time to tell them everything, would I?" Sophie said. "You wouldn't," said the BFG. "Then why did you say I might?" "Because I is brimful of buzzburgers," the BFG said. "If you listen to everything I am saying, you'll be getting an earache." "Please tell me what you were doing in our village," Sophie said. "I promise you can trust me." "Would you teach me how to make a elephant?" the BFG asked. "What do you mean by that?" Sophie said. "I would dearly love to have an elephant to ride on," the BFG said dreamily. "I would so much love to have a jolly big elephant and go riding through green forests, picking up peachy fruits off the trees all day long. This is a sizzling hot, munkin' frumpy country we live in. Nothing grows in it except snooze-cumbers. I could love to go somewhere else and pick peachy fruits in the early morning from the back of the elephant." Sophie was quite moved by the curious statement. "Perhaps one day we will get you an elephant," she said, "and peachy fruits as well. Now tell me what you were doing in our village." "If you is really wanting to know what am I doing in your village," the BFG said, "I is blowing a dream into the bedroom of those children." "Blowing a dream?" Sophie said. "What do you mean?" "I is a dream-blowing giant," the BFG said, "and all the other giants is galloping off every way. What way? And which to swallowing human beings, I scuttle away to other places to blow dreams into the bedrooms of sleeping children. Nice dreams. Lovely golden dreams, that is giving the dreamers a happy time." "Now hang on a minute," Sophie said. "What do you get those dreams? Where do you get those dreams?" "I collect them," the BFG said, waving an arm towards all the rows and rows of bottles on the shelves. "I has billions of them." "You can't collect a dream," Sophie said. "A dream isn't something you can catch hold of." "You is never going to understand about it," the BFG said. "That is why I am not wishing to tell you." "Oh, please tell me," Sophie said. "I will understand." "Go on. Tell me how you collect dreams. Tell me everything." The BFG settled himself comfortably in his chair and crossed his legs. "Dreams," he said, "is very mysterious. They is floating around in the air like little wimpsy misty bubbles, and all the time they is searching for sleeping people." "Can you see them?" Sophie asked. "Never at first." "Then how do you catch them if you can't see them?" Sophie asked. "Aha!" said the BFG. "Now we is getting on the dark and dusky secrets. I won't tell a soul. I is trusting you," the BFG said. He closed his eyes and sat quite still for a moment, while Sophie waited. "A dream," he said, as it goes whiffling through the nighty air, "is making a tiny little buzzing humming. But this little buzzy hum is so silvery soft it is impossible for a human being to be hearing it." "Can you hear it?" Sophie asked. The BFG pointed up at his enormous trunk-wheeling ears, which he now began to move in and out, and he performed the exercise proudly with a little proud smile on his face. "Is you seeing these?" he asked. "How could I miss them?" Sophie asked. "They may be is looking a little bit preposterous to you," the BFG said. "But you must believe me when I say they is very extra usual airs indeed. They is not to be coughed at." "I am quite sure they're not," Sophie said. "They is allowing me to hear absolutely every single twiddly little thing." "You mean you can hear things I can't hear?" Sophie said. "You was deaf as a dumpling compared with me," cried the BFG. "You was hearing only thumping loud noises with those little earwigs of yours, while I am hearing all the secret whispers of the world." "Such as what?" "In your country," he said, "I is hearing the footstep of a ladybird as she goes walking across a leaf." "Honestly?" Sophie said, beginning to be impressed. "Honestly," Sophie said. "What's more, is I am hearing those footsteps very loud," the BFG said. "When a ladybird is walking across a leaf, I is hearing her feet clamping and clumping along like giant's footsteps." "Good gracious me," Sophie said. "What else can you hear?" "I is hearing the little ants chittering to each other as they scuttle around in the soil." "You mean you can hear everything the ants are talking?" "Every single word," BFG said, "although I is not exactly understanding their language." "Go on," Sophie said. "Sometimes I, on a very clear night," the BFG said, "and if I is wiggling my ears in the right direction, and hair is swiveled in his great ears upward so they were facing the ceiling. If I is wiggling them like this, and the night is very clear, I can sometimes hear faraway music coming from the stars in the sky. A queer little shiver passed the Sophie's body. She sat very quiet, waiting for more. My ears is what told me you were watching me out from your window last night, the BFG said. But I didn't make a sound, Sophie said. I was hearing your heart beeping across the road, the BFG said. Loud as a drum. Go on, Sophie said, please. I can hear plants and trees. Do they talk? That is not exactly talking, but they is making noise. For example, if I come along and pick a little flower, if it is twisting the stem of the flower till it breaks, then the plant is screaming. I can hear it scream and scream very clear. You don't mean it, Sophie cried. How awful. It is screaming just like you would be screaming if someone was twisting off your arm. Is that really true? Sophie asked. You think I is squiggling you? It is rather hard to believe. Then I is not stopping right here. And the BFG sharply looked right back at him. Her face opened to his. I believe you, she said softly. She had offended him. She could see that. I wouldn't ever be fibbing to you, he said. I know you wouldn't, Sophie said, but you must understand that it is not easy to believe such an amazing thing straight away. I understand that, said the BFG. So please do forgive me and go on, she asked. He waited a little longer and then he said, It is the same with trees as it is with flowers. If I chop an axe into a tree, of a big tree, I hear a terrible sound coming from inside the heart of the tree. What sort of sound? A soft moaning sound, the BFG said. It is like the sound of an old man that is making when he is dying slowly. He paused. The cave was very silent. The tree is living and growing just like you and me, he said. They is alive. So is plants. He was sitting up very straight in his chair now, and he had his hands clasped together right in front of him. His face was bright, his eyes round and bright as two stars. Such warming and terrible sounds I is hearing, he said. Some of them you would never wish to be hearing yourselves, but some is like a glamorous whisper of music. He seemed almost to be transfigured by the excitement of his thoughts. His face was beautiful in its blaze of emotions. Tell me some more about them, Sophie said quietly. Little mices is always talking to each other, and I is always hearing them, as loud as my own voice. What do they say? Sophie asked. All the mices know that, he said. Spiders is also taking a great deal. You might not be thinking it, but spiders is the most tremendous natterboxers, and when they is spinning the webs, they is singing all the time, and they is singing sweeter than a nightingale. Who else do you hear? Asked Sophie. One of the biggest chat bugs are the caterpillars, the BFG said. What do they say? They's arguing all the time, and who is going to be the prettiest butterfly? That is all they ever talk about. Is there a dream floating around in here now? Sophie asked. The BFG moved his grey ears this way and that, listening intently. He shook his head. There is no dream in here, he said, except in the bottles. I has a special place for catching dreams. They is not often coming to giant country. How do you catch them? The same way you catch butterflies, the BFG answered, with a net. He stood up and crossed over to a corner of the cave where a pole was leaning against the wall. The pole was 30 feet long, and there was the net at the end of it. Here in the dream catcher, he said, grasping the pole with one hand. Every morning I is going out and catching every new dream to put in my bottle. Suddenly he seemed to be losing interest in the conversation. I is getting hungry, he said. It is time for eats. Snooze cumbers. But if you don't eat people like all the others, Sophie said, then what do you live on? That is a squelching, tricky problem around here, the BFG answered. In the slosh-flunking giant country, happy eats like pineapples and pigwinkles is simply not growing. Nothing is growing except for one extremely icky poo vegetable. It is called the snoozecumber. The snoozecumber, cried Sophie. There's no such thing. The BFG looked at Sophie and smiled, showing about 20 of his square white teeth. Yesterday, he said, we was not believing in giants, was we? Today, we is not believing in snoozecumbers. Just because we happen not to have actually seen something with our own two little winkles, we think it is not existing. What about, for instance, the great squizzly Scotch hopper? I beg your pardon, Sophie asked. And the humplecrip, what's that? And what's the rapscrapple? That what? And the grumpskeetle? Are they animals? Sophie asked. They is common animals, said the BFG contemptuously. I is very not known or giant myself, but it seems to me that you is absolutely know-nothing human being. Your brain is full of rotten wool. You mean cotton wool. What I mean and what I say is two different things. The BFG announced rather grandly, I will now show you a snoozecumber. The BFG flung open a massive cupboard and took out the weirdest looking thing Sophie had ever seen. It was about half as long as it was as half as long again as an ordinary man, but was much thicker. It was a stick around its girth as a perambulator. It was black with white strips along its length, and was covered all over with a coarse knobbel. "Here's the repulsant snoozecumber," said the BFG, waving it around. "I squoggle it, I despise it, I dispunge it, but because I is refusing to gobble up human beings like the other giants, I must spend my life guzzling up icky-poo snoozecumbers instead. If I don't, I'll be nothing but skin and groans." "You mean skin and bones," Sophie said. "I know it is bones," the BFG said, "but please understand that I cannot be helping if it is sometimes I saying something that's a little squiggly. I is trying my very best all the time." The big giant looked suddenly so forlorn that Sophie got quite upset. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't mean to be rude." "There never was any schools to teach me talking in the giant country," the BFG said sadly. "But couldn't your mother have taught you?" Sophie asked. "My mother!" cried the BFG. "Giants don't have mothers. Surely you knowing is that a thing?" "I did not know that," said Sophie. "Who ever heard of a woman giant?" shouted the BFG, waving the snoozecumber round his head like a lasso. "There never was a woman giant, and there never will be one. Giants is always men." Sophie felt herself getting a little muddled in that case. "So how are you born?" "Giant isn't born," the BFG said. "Giant appears, and that's all there is to it. They simply appear, the same way as the sun and the stars." "And when did you appear?" Sophie asked. "Now, how on earth could I be knowing a thing like that?" said the BFG. "I was so long ago, I couldn't count." "You mean you don't even know how old you are?" "No giant is knowing that," the BFG said. "All I is knowing about myself is that I am very, very old and crumply, perhaps as old as the earth." "What happens when a giant dies?" Sophie asked. "Giants is never dying," the BFG said. "Sometimes, and quite suddenly, a giant is disappearing and nobody is ever knowing where he goes. But mostly us giants are simply going on and on like whippy old time whittlers." The BFG was still holding the awesome snoozecumber in his hand, and now he put one in the end of his mouth and bit off a huge hunk of it. He started crunching it up, and the noise he made was like crunching a lump of ice. "It's filthing," he sputtered, speaking out of his mouth, full and spraising large pieces of snoozecumbers like bullets in Sophie's direction. Sophie hopped around on his tabletop, ducking out of the way. It's disgusturous," the BFG giggled. "It's sickable, it's rotsome, it's magawise. Try it yourself. Just spell some snoozecumber." "No, thank you." "It's all you're going to be guzzling around here from now on, so you might as well get used to it," said the BFG. "Go on, you snipsy little winkle, have a go." Sophie took a nibble. "Ugh," she sputtered out. "Oh no, gosh, oh help." She spat out quickly. "A taste of frog skin," she gasped. "A rotten fish. Worse than that," cried the BFG, roaring with laughter. "To me it is taking of cockroaches and slime wanglers." "Do we really have to eat it?" Sophie asked. "You do, unless you're wanting to become so thin you will disappear into thin air." "Into thin air?" Sophie asked. "I think car is something quite different." Once again, that said winsome look came into the BFG's eyes. Words. He says, "Oh, such a twinkling problem to me all life, so you must simply try to be patient and stop scribbling. As I'm telling you before, I know exactly what words I'm wanting to say, but somehow or the other it's always getting scribbled around." "That happens to everyone," Sophie said. "Not like it happens to me," the BFG said. "I am speaking the most terrible Wigglish." "I think you speak beautifully," Sophie said. "You do?" cried the BFG, suddenly brightening. "You really do?" "Simply beautiful," Sophie repeated. "Well, this is the nicest person anybody has ever been to me," cried the BFG. "Are you sure you was not twiddling my leg?" "Of course not," Sophie said. "I just love the way you talk." "How wondercrump," cried the BFG, still beaming. "How whoopsie spunkers, how absolutely quiffling. It is all a stutter." "Listen," Sophie said. "You don't have to eat snoozecumbers. In the fields around our village, there are all sorts of lovely vegetables. In the fields, there are like cauliflowers, carrots. Why don't you get some of those next time you go visiting?" The BFG raised his great head proudly in the air. "I is a very honourable giant," he said. "I'd rather be chewing up some rotten snoozecumbers than snitching things from you people." "You stole me," Sophie said. "I did not steal you very much," said the BFG, smiling gently. "After all, you was only a little tiny girl." Suddenly, a tremendous noise came from outside the cave entrance, and a voice like thunder shouted, "Runt! Is you there, Runt? I is hearing jabbling. Who is you jabbling to, Runt? Look out, cried the BFG. It is Blood Bottler. But before he finished speaking, the stone was rolled aside, and a 50-foot giant, more than twice as tall as he was wide as the BFG, came striding into this cave. He was naked except for a dirty piece of cloth around his bottom. Sophie was on the tabletop. The enormous, partly eaten snoozecumber was lying near her. She ducked behind it. The creature came clumping into the cave and stood towering over the BFG. Who was you jabbling to here just now? I was jabbling to myself, the BFG said. Purple fizz, shouted the Blood Bottler. Bug swabble, he boomed. You were talking to a human being. That's what I was thinking. No, no, cried the BFG. Just, bloomed the Blood Bottler. I is guessing you had snatched away a human being and brought it back to your bunghole as a pet. So now I is blinking it out and guzzling it extra snacks before my supper. The poor BFG was very nervous. There's no one here, he stammered. Why don't you leave me alone? The Blood Bottler pointed a finger as large as a tree trunk at the BFG. Runty little scrumscrewer, he shouted. Piffling little squiggler. Scrimpy little bottlewort. Prunty little hobsquealer. I is now going to search the primrose, he grabbed the BFG by the arm, and you is going to help me. Us together is going to winkle at the tasteful little human being, he shouted. The BFG had intended to whisk Sophie off the table as soon as he got the chance and hide her behind her back. But now there was no hope of doing this. Sophie peered around the chewed-up area of the enormous newscumber, watching the two giants as they moved around the cave. The Blood Bottler was a gruesome sight. His skin was reddish pink. There was black hair around his chest and arm, and on his stomach. The hair on his head was long and dark and tangled. His face and his foul face was round and squashed-looking. The eyes were tiny black holes. The nose was small, but the mouth was huge. It spread right across the face, almost ear to ear, and it had lips that were like two giant squiggle purple frankfurters lying on one top of the other. Craggy yellow teeth stuck out between the two purple frankfurter lips, and rivers of spit ran down over the chin. It was not in the least difficult to believe that this ghastly brute ate men, women, and children every night. The Blood Bottler, still holding the BFG by the arm, was examining the rows and rows of bottles. You and your pibbling bottles, he shouted. What is you putting in them? Nothing that would interest you, the BFG answered. You is only interested in guzzling human beings, and you is a dotty dog's worth, cried the Blood Bottler. Soon the Blood Bottler would be coming back, Sophie told herself, and he was about to search the tabletop. But she couldn't possibly jump off the table. It was 12 feet high. She'd break a leg. The snoozecumber, although it was thick as a perambulator, was not going to hide her as the Blood Bottler picked it up. She examined the chewed-up end. It had large seeds in the middle, each one as big as a melon. There were embedded in soft, slimy stuff. Taking care to stay out of sight, Sophie reached forward and scooped half a dozen of those seeds. This left a hole in the middle of the snoozecumber large enough for her to crouch in, so long as she rolled herself up in a small ball. She crawled it out, and it was a wet and slimy hiding place. But what did that matter if it was going to save her from being eaten? The Blood Bottler and the BFG were coming back towards the table now. The BFG was nearly fainting with fear. Any moment, he was telling himself, Sophie would be discovered and eaten. Suddenly, the Blood Bottler grabbed the half-eaten snoozecumber. The BFG stared at the bare table. Sophie, where is you? He thought desperately. You cannot possibly be jumping off the table. So, where is you hiding, Sophie? So this is the filthy Watson glubbage you is eating, boomed her Blood Bottler, holding up the partly eaten snoozecumber. You must be cockles to be guzzling such rubble squash. For a moment, the Blood Bottler seemed to have forgotten about his search for Sophie. BFG decided to leave him further off his track. This is scrumdelicious snoozecumber, he said. I is guzzling it gleefully every night and day. Is you never trying a snoozecumber, Blood Bottler? Human beings is juicier, the Blood Bottler said. You is talking rummy-tot, the BFG said, growing braver by the second. He was thinking that if only he could get the Blood Bottler to take one bite of the repulsive vegetable, the sheer foulness of its flavour would send him bellowing out of the cave. I's happy to let you sample it, the BFG went on. But please, when you see how truly scrumptious it is, do not guzzle the whole thing. Leave me a little snitchet for my supper. The Blood Bottler stared suspiciously with small prickly eyes as the snoozecumber. Sophie, crouching inside the chewed-off end, began to tremble all over. You's not switch-fiddling me, is you? Said the Blood Bottler. Never, cried the BFG passionately. Take a bite, and I am positive you will be shouting out how scrumptious the Wonder Rig is. The BFG could see how greedy the Blood Bottler's mouth began to water. more and more, even at the prospect of extra food. Vegetables is very good for you, he went on. It is never wholesome, always to be eating meaty things. Just this once, the blood bottler said, I is going to take this rotten eats of yours, but I was warning you that if it is fulsome, I am smashing you over the sludgy little head. He picked up the snooze cumber. He began raising it along the journey to his mouth. Some 50 feet up the air, Sophie wanted to scream, don't, but that would have been an even more certain death. Crouching among the slimy seeds, she felt herself being lifted up and up and up. Suddenly, there was a crunch at the blood bottler, bit a huge chunk off the end. Sophie saw his yellow teeth clamping together a few inches from his head. Then there was utter darkness. She was in his mouth. Then they caught a whiff of his evil-smelling breath. It stank of bad meat. She waited for the teeth to go crunch once and more. She prayed that she would be killed quickly. Youch! Cried the blood bottler. Youch! And then he spat. All the great lumps of snooze cumber there were in his mouth, as well as Sophie herself, when shooting out across the cave. If Sophie had struck the stone wall of the cave, she would have been certainly almost killed. Instead, she hit the soft folds of the BFG's black cloak, hanging against the wall. She dropped onto the ground, half stunned. Then she crawled under the hem of the cloak, and there she crouched. You little swine bugler, roared the blood bottler. You little pig swigger. He rushed at the BFG and smashed what was left of the snooze cumber over his head. Fragments of the filthy vegetable splashed all over the cave. You is not loving it? The BFG asked innocently, rubbing his head. Loving it yet, the blood bottler? This is the most disgusting taste that is ever clenching my teeth. You must be buggers to be swapping sludge like that every night. You could be galloping off as happy as a hamburger and gobbling juicy human beings. Eating human beings is wrong and evil, the BFG said. It is gusty and glumptious, shouted the blood bottler, and tonight I is gobbling off the chili to swallow a few human chili beans. And it's you wishing to know why I is choosing chili? I is not wishing to know anything, the BFG said, dignified. I is choosing the chili, the blood bottler said, because it is fed with the taste of Eskimos. It is important. I have plenty of cold eats in the scuttling hot weather, and the next coldest thing to the Eskimo is chili bean. Human beings from Chile is really chilly. Horrible, the BFG said. You ought to be ashamed of yourselves. Other giants are saying that they is wanting to gallop up to England tonight to school chudlers. The blood bottler said, I is very fond indeed of English school chudlers. This is a nice inky-booky flavour. Perhaps I'll change my mind and go to England with them. You is disgusting, the BFG said. And you is an insult to the giant people, shouted the blood bottler. You is not fit to be giant. You is a squinky little squiddler. You is a pibbly little pipsqueak. You is a grim poofnut. With that, the horrible bloodling giant strode off out of the cave. The BFG ran to the cave entrance and quickly rolled the stone back into place. Sophie whispered. Sophie, where is you, Sophie? Sophie emerged from under the hem of the black cloak. I'm here, he said. The BFG picked her up and held her tenderly in the palm of her hand. I so happy to be finding you all in one lump. I was in his mouth, Sophie said. You was what? Cried the BFG. Sophie told him what happened. And there I was telling him to eat the fulsome snooze cumber. And you was all this time inside it? The BFG cried. Not much fun, Sophie said. Just look at you, the poor little chudler cried. You is all covered in snooze cumber and giant spit. He set out cleaning her up as best as he could. I's hating those giants more than ever now. You know what I should like? What? Sophie said. I should like to find a way of disappearing them, every single one. I'll be glad to help you, Sophie said. Let me see if I can think of one way of doing it. Prob, Scottle, and Whiz Poppers. By now, Sophie was beginning to feel not only extremely hungry, but very thirsty as well. Had she not been home, she would have finished her breakfast long ago. Are you sure there's nothing else to eat around here except those disgusting, smelly snooze cumbers? She asked. Not even a fizzwinkle, answered the big friendly giant. In that case, may I please have some little water? She said. Water? Said the BFG, frowning mightily. What is water? We drink it, Sophie said. What do you drink? Probscottle, announced the BFG. All giants is drinking Probscottle. It is nasty as your snooze cumbers, Sophie asked. Nasty, cried the BFG. Never is it nasty. Probscottle is sweet and jumbly. He got up from his chair and went to a second huge cupboard. He opened it up and took out a glass bottle that must have been 6 feet tall. The liquid inside it was pale green and the bottle was half full. Here's a Probscottle, he cried, holding the bottle up and high as it contained some rare wine. The lumptious fizzle Probscottle, he shouted. He gave it a shake, and then the green stuff began to fizz like mad. But look, it's fizzing the wrong way, Sophie cried. And indeed it is. The bubbles, instead of travelling upwards and bursting to the surface, were shooting downwards and bursting at the bottom. A pale green frothy frizz was forming at the bottom of the bottle. What on earth is you meaning the wrong way? Asked the BFG. In our fizzy drink, Sophie said, the bubbles always go up and burst at the top. Upwards is the wrong way, cried the BFG. You mustn't ever be having the bubbles going upwards. That's the most flush-bunking rubbish I've ever heard. What do you say? Sophie asked. You was asking me why, cried the BFG, waving the enormous bottle around as though they were conducting an orchestra. You was actually telling me why you cannot see why it is a squatty mistake to have bubbles flying upwards and sit down. You said it was flush-bunking. Now you say it is Scotty. What is it? Sophie asked politely. Both cried the BFG. It's a flush bunking and a squatting mistake to let the bubbles go upwards. If you can't see why, you must be as quacky as a dunkhound. My wrinkle your head must be so full of frog swinkers and buzzwangles. I've frittered if I know how you think at all. Why shouldn't the bubbles go upwards? Sophie asked. I'll explain to the BFG. But tell me what the name is you call the frog scuttle. One is Coke, Sophie said. Another is Pepsi. There are lots of them. And the bubbles is all going up? They all go up, Sophie asked. Catastrophe, said the BFG. Upgoing bubbles is a catastrophe. Will you please tell me why? Sophie said. If you will listen carefully, I'll try to explain, said the BFG. But your brain is so full of bug whiffles, I doubt you will ever understand. I'll do my best, Sophie said patiently. Very well then. When you was drinking this cokey drink of yours, said the BFG, it is going straight down into your tummy. Is that right, or is it left? It is right, Sophie said. And the bubbles is going all into your tummy, right? Or left? Right again, Sophie said. And the bubble is fizzing upwards, of course, Sophie said. Which means, said the BFG, that they will all come swizzling out of your throat and out of your mouth with a frowsome, bouchy burp. That is often true, Sophie said. But it's wrong for a little burp now and again. It's sort of fun. Burping is fulsome, said the BFG. Us giants is never doing it. But with your drink, Sophie said. What was it you called it? Frobscottle, said the BFG. With Frobscottle, the BFG, in your tummy, with going down, and that you could have a far nastier result. Why nasty? Asked the BFG. Because, Sophie said, blushing a little, if they go down instead of going up, they were coming out somewhere else with an even louder and ruder noise. A whiz popper, cried the BFG, beaming at her. Us giants is making whiz poppers all the time. Whiz poppers is a sign of happiness. It is music to your ear. You surely is not telling me that little whiz popper is forbidden among human beings. It's considered extremely rude, Sophie said. But your whiz popping is you not now and again? Asked the BFG. Everyone is whiz popping, if that's what you call it, Sophie asked. Kings and queens are whiz popping, presidents are whiz popping, glamorous film stars are whiz popping, little babies are whiz popping. But where I come from, it is not polite to talk about it. Ridiculous, said the BFG. If everyone is making whiz poppers, then why not talk about it? We is now having a swiggle of this delicious frobscottle, and you will see the happy result. The BFG shook the bottle vigorously. A pale green stuff fizzled and bubbled. He removed the cork and took a tremendous gurgly swig. It's glummy, he cried. I love it. For a few moments, the big friendly giant stood quite still, and look of absolute ecstasy began to spread over his long, wrinkly face. Then suddenly, the heavens opened, and he let fly with a series of the loudest and rudest noises Sophie had ever heard in her life. They reverberated around the walls of the cave like a thunder, and the glass jars rattled on their shelves. But most astonishing of all, the force of the explosion actually lifted the enormous giant Claire off his feet like a rocket. Whoopee! He cried when he came back down to earth. Now that is whiz popping for you. Sophie burst out laughing. She couldn't help it. Have some yourself, cried the BFG, tipping the neck of an enormous bottle towards her. Don't you have a cup? Sophie said. No cups, only bottles. Sophie opened her mouth, and very gently the BFG tipped the bottle towards and poured some of the Flabby Mouse Frobscottle down her throat. And oh gosh, how delicious it was. It was sweet and refreshing. It tasted of vanilla and cream, with just the faintest trace of raspberries on the edge of the flavor, and the bubbles were wonderful. Sophie could actually feel them bouncing and bursting all around her tummy. It was an amazing sensation. It felt as though hundreds of tiny little people were dancing a jig inside her, and tickling her toes. It was lovely. It's lovely, she cried. Just wait, said the BFG, flapping his ears. Sophie could feel the bubbles traveling lower and lower down her tummy. Then suddenly, inevitably, the explosion came. The trumpets sounded, and she too made the wall of the cavern ring with the sound of music and thunder. Bravo! Shouted the BFG, waving the bottle. You is very good for a beginner. Let's have some more. Journey to Dream Country. After the mad Robscottle party was over, Sophie settled herself down on top of the enormous table. "You is feeling better now?" asked the big friendly giant. "Much, much better, thank you to you," Sophie said. Whenever I feel a bit scotchy," the BFG said, "a few gallops of Robscottle was always making me hopscotchy again." "I must say, it's quite an experience," Sophie said. "It's raz-twizzling," the BFG said. "It's gloriumptious." He turned away and strolled across the cave and picked up his dream-catching net. "I's galloping off now," he said, "to catch some more whoopsie-whiffling dreams for my collection. I's doing that every day without missing. Is you wishing to come with me?" "Not me, thank you very much," said Sophie. "Not with those other giants lurking around. I's struggling you very cozy into the pocket of my waistcoat," the BFG said. "Then no one is seeing you." Before Sophie could protest, he picked her up off the table and popped her in the waistcoat pocket. There was plenty of room in there. "Is you wishing for a little hole to peep out from?" "There's already one here," she said. She found a small hole in the pocket, and once she put one eye close to it, she could see very well. She watched the BFG as he bent down and filled his suitcase. With empty glass jars, he closed his lid, picked up the suitcase in one hand, and took the pole with the next, on the other end, in the hand, and marched towards the entrance of the cave. As soon as he was outside, the BFG set off across the great yellow, hot wasteland, where the blue rocks lay and the dead trees stood, and where all the other giants were skulking out. Sophie, squatting low on her heels in the pocket of the leather waistcoat, had one eye glued onto the little hole. She saw the group of enormous giants about 300 yards ahead. "Hold your breaths," the BFG whispered down to her. "Cross your fingers, here we go. We's going right past all these other giants. Is you seeing what the whooping great one, the one nearest to us?" "I see him," Sophie whispered back, quivering. "That is the horriblest of them all, and the biggest of them all. He is called the flesh-eating giant." "I don't want to hear about this," Sophie said. "He is 44 feet high," and the BFG said softly as he joggled along, "and he is swallowing human beings like a sugar lump 2 or 3 times at it." "You're making me nervous," Sophie said. "I is nervous myself," the BFG whispered. "I always get to jumpsy as a jog hopper when the fresh lumpy king giant is around." "Keep him away from me," Sophie pleaded. "Not possible," the BFG answered. "He's galloping easily 2 times as quick as me." "Shall we turn back?" Sophie said. "Turning back is worse," the BFG said. "If they is seeing me running away, they is all giving chase and throwing rocks. They would never eat you, though." "Would they?" Sophie asked. "Giants is never guzzling at other giants," the BFG said. "They is fighting and squabbling a lot with each other, but never guzzling. Human beings is more tasty to them." The giants had already spotted the BFG, and all the other heads were turned, watching him as he jogged down towards us. He was aiming to pass well to the right of the group. Through her little peephole, Sophie saw the flesh-lump-eating giant moving her to intercept them. He didn't hurry. He just loped over casually to a point where the BFG would have to pass. The others loped him after. Sophie counted 9 of them altogether, and she recognized the blood bottler in the middle of them. They were bored. They had nothing to do until nightfall. There was an air of menace about them, and they loped slowly across the plain of long loping strides, heading for the BFG. "Here comes the runty one," boomed the flesh-lumping-eating giant. "Oh no, there, grunting one. Where is you?" splashed Winkling away, to in such a hefty hurry. He shot out an enormous arm and grabbed the BFG by the ear. The BFG didn't struggle. He simply stopped and stood quite still and said, "Be so kind as to be letting go of my hair, plump lump eater." The flesh lump eater released him and stepped back. A pace the other giants stood around, waiting for fun to start. "Now then, you little grub squiddler," boomed the flesh lump eating. "We is all of us wanting to know where you is galloping off to every day in the daytime. Nobody out to be galloping off to anywhere until it's getting dark. The human beings could easily be spotting you and start a giant hunt, and we is not wanting that to happen, is we not?" "We is not," shouted the other giants. "Go back to your cave, runty one." "I is not galloping to any human being country," the BFG said. "I is going to other places." "I is thinking," said the plump eater, "that you is catching human beings and keeping them as pets." "Right you is," cried the blood bottler. "Just now, I hear you chattering away with one of them in your cave." "He was welcome to go and search my cave from frack to bunt," the BFG answered. "You can go looking every cook and nanny. There's no human beings, or stinging beans, or runner beans, or jelly beans, or any other beans in there." Sophie crouched still as a mouse inside the BFG's pocket. She hardly dared to breathe. She was terrified that she might sneeze. The slightest sound or movement would give her away, though the tiny peephole she watched through. The giants clustered round the poor BFG. How revolting they were! All of them had piggy little eyes and enormous mouths. When the flush lump eater was speaking, she got a glimpse of his tongue. It was jet black like a slab of black steak. Every one of them was more than twice as tall as the BFG. Suddenly, the flesh lump eater shot out two enormous hands and grabbed the BFG around the waist. He tossed him high in the air and shouted, "Catch him, man-hugger!" The man-hugger caught him. The other giants spread out quickly in a large circle, each giant about 20 yards from each other, preparing for the game they were going to play. Now, the man-hugger threw the BFG high and far, shouting, "Catch him, Bone Cruncher!" The Bone Cruncher ran forward and caught the tumbling BFG and immediately swung him up again. "Catch him, Child Chewer!" he shouted, and so it went on. The giants were playing ball with the BFG, vying with each other to see who could throw the highest. Sophie dug her nails into the sides of the pocket, trying to prevent herself from tumbling out when she was upside down. She felt as though she was in a barrel going over the Niagara Falls, and all the time there was a fearful danger that one of the giants would fail to catch the BFG, and he would go crashing to the ground. "Catch him, Meat Dripper! Catch him, Gizzard Jumper! Catch him, Maid Smasher! Catch him, Bud Bottler! Catch him, catch him, catch him!" In the end, they got bored with the game. They dumped the poor BFG on the ground. He was dead and shattered. They gave him a few kicks and shouted, "Run, you little runt! Let's see how fast you is running and galloping." The BFG ran. What else could he do? The giants picked up rocks and hurtled at him. He managed to dodge them. "Ruddy little runt!" they shouted. "Shoggy little twit! Shrivelly little shrimp! Mucky little midget! Squiggly little squib! A grubbly little grub!" At last the BFG got clear of them, and in another couple of minutes the pack of giants were out of sight over the horizon. Sophie popped her head from the pocket. "I didn't like that," she said. "Phew," said the BFG. "Phew, the far in between. There was a nasty crouching mood today, was they not? I saw you were having a swirgling little time." "No, worse than you," Sophie said. "Would they ever really hurt you?" "I isn't ever trusting them," the BFG said. "How do you actually catch the humans they eat?" Sophie asked. "There's usually just sticking the arm in and through the bedroom window and snatching them from their beds," the BFG said. "Like you did to me." "But I isn't eating you," the BFG said. "How else do I catch them?" Sophie asked. "Sometimes," the BFG said, "they're swimming in from the sea like fishies. With others, their heads showing above the water, and then out comes a big hairy hand and grabs someone off the beach." "Children as well?" "Often children," the BFG said. "Little chidlers who was building sand castles on the beach. That is who was swimming, mounting after another. Little chidlers is not enough to eat, so grandmama. So says the child chewing giant." As they talked, the BFG was galloping fast over the land. Sophie was standing right up in his waistcoat pocket now, and holding on to the edge with both hands. Her head and shoulders were in the open and the wind was blowing in her hair. "How else do they catch people?" she asked. "All of them is having their own special ways of catching a human being," the BFG said. "The meat-dripping giant is prepared to pretend he is a big tree growing in the big park. He is standing in the dusky evening, and he is holding a great big branch over his head, and there he is waiting until some families is coming to have a picnic under the spreading tree. The meat-dripping giant is watching them as they lay down out their picnic. But in the end, it is the meat dripper who is having this picnic." "It's so awful," Sophie cried. "The gizzard droppler giant is a city lover," the BFG went on. "The gizzard gulper is lying high up between the roofs of houses on the big cities. He is lying there, snugly as a sniggler, and watching the human beings walking in the street and below. And when he sees one, he grabs it. He simply is reaching down and snatching off the street like a monkey taunting a nut. He says it is nice to be able to pick and choose which one you want to have for supper. He says it is like choosing from a menu." "Don't people ever see him doing it?" Sophie asked. "Never is they seeing him," Sophie said. "Do not forget it is dusky dark at this time. Also, the gizzard gulper has a very fast arm. His arm is going up and down quicker than Squinker's. But if all these people are disappearing every night, surely there's some sort of outcry, Sophie said. "The world is a whooping big place," the BFG said. "It has 100 different countries. The giants is clever. They is careful not to skittle off the same country too often. They is always squiddling around." "Even so," Sophie said. "Do not forget," the BFG said. "The human beings is disappearing everywhere all the time without the giants guzzling it up. Human beings is killing each other more quicker than giants is doing it." "But they don't eat each other," Sophie said. "Giants isn't eating each other either," the BFG said. "Nor is giants killing each other. Giants is not very lovely, but they is not killing each other. Nor is Crowder Brownies killing each other.
and crocodile knees. Noah's pussycats killing pussycats. They kill mice, Sophie said. Ah, but they is not killing their own kind, the BFG said. Human beings is the only animals that is killing their own kind. Don't poisonous snakes kill each other, Sophie asked. She was searching desperately for another creature that behaved as badly as the human. Even poisonous snakes is never killing each other, the BFG said. Nor is the most fearsome creatures like tigers and rhinoceros. None of them is ever killing their own kind. Have you ever thought about that? Sophie kept silent. I am not understanding human beings at all, the BFG said. You're a human being and you are saying it is grisly and horrendous for giants to be eating human beings, right or left? Right, Sophie said. But human beings are squishing each other all the time, the BFG said. They're shooting guns and going up in airplanes and drop their bombs on each other's heads every week. Human beings is always killing each other human beings. He was right. Of course he was right, and Sophie knew it. She was beginning to wonder whether humans were actually any better than giants. Even so, she said, defending her own race. I think it's rotten that those foul giants should go off every night to eat human beings. Have human beings ever done anything? That's what the little piggy-wig is saying every day, the BFG answered. He's saying, I've never done anything to harm human beings, so why should he be eating me? Oh dear, Sophie said. The human beings is making rules to suit themselves, the BFG went on. But the rules that is making do not suit the little piggy-wigs. Am I right or left? Right, Sophie said. Giants is also making rules. Their rules is not suiting the human beings. Everybody is making their own rules to suit themselves. But you don't like it that those beastly giants are eating humans every night, do you? Sophie said. I do not, the BFG asked firmly. One right is not making two lefts. Is you quite cozy down there in the pocket? I'm fine, Sophie said. Then suddenly once again the BFG went into the magical top gear of his. He began hurtling forward with phenomenal leaps. His speed was unbelievable. The landscape became blurrier, and again Sophie had to duck down out of the whistling gale to save her head from being blown off her shoulders. She crouched in the pocket and listened to the wind screaming past it. It came knifing in through the tiny peephole in the pocket and reached around her like a hurricane. But those times the BFG didn't stay in top gear long. It seemed as though he had some barrier to cross, a vast mountain. He had once again slowed down to his normal gallop, and Sophie was able to pop her head and look out once more at the view. She noticed immediately that they were now in an altogether paler country. The sun had disappeared, and above a film of vapor, the air was becoming cooler every minute. The land was flat and treeless, and there seemed to be no color at all. Every minute the mist became thicker, the air became soon colder, and soon everything was grey and white all around. They were in a country of swirling mist and ghostly vapors. There was some sort of grass underfoot, but it was not green. It was ashy grey. There was no sign of a living creature, and no sign at all, except for the soft thud. Suddenly he stopped. We is here at last, he announced. He bent down and lifted Sophie from his pocket and put her on the ground. She was still in her nightie, and her two feet were bare. She shivered and stared around her as the swirling mist and ghostly vapors. Where are we? She asked. We is in dream country, the BFG said. This is where all the dreams is beginning. Dream catching. The BFG giant pulled the suitcase on the ground. He bent down so slowly that his enormous face was close to Sophie's. From now on, we is keeping us still as a winky little missies, he whispered. Sophie nodded. The misty little vapor swirled around her and made her cheeks damp and left dewdrops in her hair. The BFG opened a suitcase and took out several empty jars. He set them ready on the ground with their screw tops removed. Then he stood up very straight. His head was now high up in the swirling mist, and it kept disappearing then again and again. He was holding the long net in his right hand. Sophie, starting upwards, staring towards there, saw through the mist that his colossal ears were beginning to swivel out from his head. They began waving gently to and fro. Suddenly the BFG pounced and he leaped high in the air and swung the net through the mist with a great swishing sweep of his arm. Got him! He cried. A jar! A jar! Quick, quick, quick! Sophie picked up a jar and held it up to him. He grabbed hold of it. He lowered the net very carefully. He tipped something absolutely invisible from the net in the jar. He dropped the net and swiftly clapped them over the jar. The top, he whispered. The jar, top, quick! Sophie picked up the screw top and handed it to him. He screwed it on tight and the jar was closed. The BFG was very excited. He held the jar close to one ear and listened intently. It's a winkle swiffler, he whispered with a thrill. It's even better. It's a fizz wizard. It's a golden fizz wizard.
Oh my, he said, holding the jar in front of him. This would be giving some little toddler a very happy night when I was blowing it in. Is it really a good one? Sophie asked. A good one, he cried. It's a golden fizzwood. It is not often I get one of these. He handed the jar to Sophie and said, Please be as still as a starfish now. I was thinking there may be a whole swarm of fizzwizards up here today. And do kindly stop breathing. You is terribly noisy down there. I haven't moved a muscle, Sophie said. Then don't. The BFG answered sharply. Once again, he stood up tall in the mist, holding his net at the ready. Then came the long silence, the waiting, the listening. At last, with surprised suddenness came the leap of the swish of the net. Another jar, he cried. Quick, quick, quick! When the second dream was safely put in the jar and the top was screwed down, the BFG held it to his ear. Oh no, he cried. Oh, mince my maggots, oh, swipe my swoggles. What's the matter? It's a Troggle Humper, he shouted. His voice was bowed with fury and anguish. Oh, save our souls, he cried. Deliver us from weasels. The devil is dancing on my dibbler. What are you talking about, Sophie said. The BFG was more distressed than every moment. Oh, bash my eye bones, he cried, waving the jar in the air. I come all this way to your lovely golden dream, and what is I catching? What are you catching? Sophie said. I was catching a frightsome Troggle Humper, he cried. That is a bad, bad dream. It is worse than a bad dream. It is a nightmare. Oh dear, Sophie said. What will you do with that? I was never letting it go, the BFG cried. If I do, then some poor little toddler will be having the most cold-blooding time. This one is a real kicky, boggy thumper. I exploding it as soon as I get home. Nightmares are horrible, Sophie said. I had one once I woke up and swishing all over. With this one, you'd be waking up screaming all over, the BFG said. This one will make your teeth stand on one end. If this one got onto you, your blood would be freezing to icicles, and your skin would be creeping across the floor. Is it as bad as that? It's worse, cried the BFG. This is a real whoopsie, Grob Switcher. You said it was a grog humper, Sophie told him. It is a grog humper, cried the exasperated BFG. But it is also a bog thumper and a grub switcher. It is all three riddled into one. Oh, I is so glad. I is clutching it tight. Oh, you wicked beastie, he cried, holding up the jar and staring into it. Nevermore is you going to be bunkle-doodling the poor little human beanie toddlers, Sophie, who was also staring into the glass jar, cried out. I can see it. There's something in there. Of course there is something in there, the BFG said. He was looking to fight some Troggle Humper, but he told me dreams were invisible. There is always invisible until they are captured, the BFG told her. After they is losing a little of their invisibility, we are seeing the one very clearly. Inside the jar, Sophie could see the faint scarlet outline of something that looked like a mixture of a blob of gas and a bubble jelly. It was more violently and thrashing against the side of the jars and forever changing the shape. It's wiggly all over the place, Sophie cried. It's fighting to get out. It will bash itself to bits. The nastier the dream, the angrier it gets when it is imprisoned, the BFG said. It's the same when the wild animals. If an animal is very fierce and you're putting it in a cage, it will make a tremendous rumpudumpus. If it is a nice animal like a cockatoo or a frogglefrump, it will sit quietly. Dreams is exactly the same. This one is a nasty, fierce, bog-trumper nightmare. Just look at it, slashing himself at the glass. It's quite frightening, Sophie cried. It would be hating to get this one inside me on a darksome night, the BFG said. So would I, said Sophie. The BFG stared, putting the bottles back into the suitcase. Is that all? Sophie asked. Are we going? I was so upset, but this Troggle Humper, bog-thumping Grob Switcher, the BFG said. Her eyes not wishing to go on. Dream catching is finished for today. Soon Sophie went back in the waistcoat pocket, and the BFG was racing home as fast as he could. When at last they emerged out of the mist and they came again onto the hot yellow wasteland, all the other giants were sprawled on the ground fast asleep. There's always having a Troggle Humper for a flash lump eater. They is always having 50 winks before they go scampering off to human beings every night, the BFG said. He stopped for a few moments to let Sophie have a better look. Giants is only sleeping every now and then. Not nearly as much as a human being. Human being is crazy for sleeping. It is ever occurring to you that a human being who is 50 is spending about 20 years sleeping fast? I must admit, that never occurred to me, Sophie said. You should allow it occur to you, the BFG said. Imagine it, please. The human being who says he is 50 has been fast asleep for 20 years and is not even knowing where he is. Not even doing anything. Not even thinking. It's funny, thought Sophie. Exactly, the BFG said. So, what I try to explain to you is that a human being who says he is 50 is not 50. He is only 30. What about me, Sophie said. I am 8. Not 8 at all.
Human being, babies, and little children is only spending half their time sleeping, so you is only 4. I'm 8, Sophie said. You may think you is 8, the BFG said, but you has only spent 4 years of your life with your little eyes open. You is only 4, and please stop higgling me. Titchy little snap whippers like you should not be higgling around with an old sage and onions who's hundreds of years more than you. How much do giants sleep? Sophie asked. They've never been wasting much time snoozling, the BFG said. 2 or 3 hours is enough. When do you sleep? Sophie asked. Even less, the BFG said. I is only sleeping once in a blue moon. Sophie, peeping out from her pocket, examined the 9 sleeping giants. They looked even more grotesque now that they were awake, sprawled out across the yellow plain and covered an area the size of a football field. Most of them were lying out on their backs with an enormous mouth wide open, and they were snoring like foghorns. Their noise was awful. Suddenly the BFG gave a jump in the air. By Gumfrog, he cried. I is just having the most whoopsie-whiffling idea. What? Sophie said. Wait, he cried. Hold your horse feathers. Keep your skirt on. Just wait to see what I is going to bring about. He galloped off fast to his cave, with Sophie hanging on tight on the rim of his pocket. He rolled back the stone. He entered the cave. He was very excited. He was moving quickly. You stay where you is in my pocket, Huggy Bee, he said. We's doing this lovely bit of buck washing both together, he said. Aside the dream-catching net but hung on the suit, he ran across the other side of the cave and grabbed a long trumpet thing. The one had been carrying when Sophie had first seen him in the village. With the suitcase in one hand and the trumpet in the other hand, he dashed out of the cave. What is he up to now? Sophie wondered. Peep your head up good, the BFG said. Then you will get a fine winkle of what is going on. When the BFG came near to the sleeping giants, he slowed his pace, and he moved slowly and softly. He crept on his toes towards the ugly brutes. They were still snoring loudly. They looked repulsive, filthy, diabolical. The BFG tiptoed around them. He went past the gizzard gulper, and then the blood bottler, and then the meat dripper, and the child chewer. Then he stopped. He had reached the flesh lump eater. He pointed at him, then he looked down at Sophie and gave her a big wink. He knelt on the ground and very quietly he opened the suitcase. He took it out of the glass jar containing the terrible, nightmarish Choggle Humper. At that point, Sophie guessed what was going on. Ouch, she thought. This could be dangerous. She crouched lower into his pocket so that only the top of her head and her eyes were showing. She wanted to be ready to duck down at the very sight anything could go wrong. They were about 10 feet away from Flesh Lump Eater's face. The snorting noise he made was disgusting. Every now and again, a big bubble of spit formed between his 2 lips and his nose, and it would make a big burst and splash and cover his face with saliva. Taking infinite care, the BFG unscrewed the top of the glass jar and tipped the squiggling, squirming, faintly scarlet Choggle Humper into the wide end of his long trumpet. He put the other end of the trumpet to his lips. He aimed the instrument directly at the Flesh Lump Eater's face. He took a deep breath and puffed it out his cheeks, and then woof, he blew. Sophie saw a flash of pale red go darting towards the giant's face. For a second, it hovered above the face. Then it was gone. It seemed to have been sucked up by the giant's nose, but it had all happened so quickly. Sophie couldn't be sure. We had better be skidding away quick to where it is safe, the BFG whispered. He trotted off for about 100 yards, then he stopped. He crouched low to the earth. Now, he said, we is waiting for the gun and the flames to begin. They didn't have to wait long. The air was suddenly pierced by the most fearful roar Sophie had never heard of. She saw the Flesh Lump Eater's body in all 45 feet rise up off the ground and fall back with a thump. Then it began to wriggle and twist and bounce in the most violent fashion. It was quite frightening to watch. Yow! Roared the Flesh Lump Eater. Ow! Ow! He's still asleep, the BFG whispered. The terrible Choggle Humper nightmare is beginning to hit him. Serves him right, Sophie said. She could feel no sympathy for him for his great brute who ate children as though they were sugar lumps. Save us! Screamed the Flesh Lump Eater, thrashing about madly. He is after me! He is getting me! The thrashing of the limbs and the waving of the arms became more violent by the second. It was an awesome thing to watch such a massive creature having such a mighty convulsion. It's Jack! Bellowed the Flesh Lump Eater. It's a gruesome, conscious Jack! Jack is after me! Jack is whack crackling me! Jack is spite sticking me! Jack is splash punking me! It is a terrible fight, spit Jack. The Flesh Lump Eater was writhing about over the ground like some colossal tortured snake. Oh, spare me, Jack, he yelled. Don't hurt me. Who is the Jack he's on about? Sophie whispered. Jack is the only human being all giants is frightened of, the BFG told her. They is absolutely terrified of Jack. They is all hearing that Jack is a famous giant killer.
Save me! Screamed the flesh lump eater. Have mercy on this poor little giant, the beanstalk. He is coming at me with this terrible spite-sticking beanstalk. Take it away, I was begging you. Jack, I was praying you not to touch me with your terrible spite-sticking beanstalk. Us giants, the BFG whispered, is not knowing very much of the dreaded human being called Jack. We is only knowing that he is a famous giant killer, and that he is owning something called a beanstalk. We is knowing that the beanstalk is a fearsome thing that Jack is using to kill giants. Sophie couldn't stop smiling. What is it you're giggling at? The BFG asked her, slightly nettled. I'll tell you later, Sophie said. The awful nightmare had now gripped the great brute to such an extent that he was trying his whole body into knots. Do not do it, Jack, he screeched. I was not eating you. Jack, I was never eating human beings. I swear, I was never gobbled a human being in my whole life. Lies, said the BFG. Just then one of the flesh lump eater's failing fists caught the still fast meat dripping giant smack in the mouth. At the same time, one of his ferociously thrashing legs kicked the snoring, gizzard-grumping giant. Giant runts in the gut. Both the injured giants woke up, and they leaped to their feet. He's swiping me right from under my mouth, yelled the meat dripper. He's bungle swapping me and smacking me in the gut. The two of them rushed at the lump eater and began pounding at him with their fists and feet. The wretched flesh lump eater woke up with a bang. He walked straight from one nightmare into another. He roared into the back and then bellowed, thumping. Rough and tumble that followed. One sleeping giant after another. Either will get stepped on or kicked. Soon all 9 of them were on their feet, having the most almighty free-for-all. They punched and kicked and scratched and bit and butted each other as hard as they could. Blood flowed, noses went crunch, teeth fell out like hailstones. The giants roared and screamed and cursed, and for many minutes the noise of battle rolled across the yellow plain. The BFG smiled a big, wide smile of absolute pleasure. I was loving it when they is all having a good rough and rumble. They'll kill each other, Sophie said. Never, said the BFG. Those beasts always bishing and walloping at one another. Soon it'll be getting dusky, and they'll be galloping off full of their tummies. They are of course foul and filthy, Sophie said. I hate them. As the BFG headed back to the cave, he said quietly, we certainly was putting that nightmare to no good use, wasn't we? Excellent use, Sophie said. Well done you. The big friendly giant was seated at the giant table at his cave, and he was doing his homework. Sophie sat cross-legged on the tabletop nearby watching him at work. A glass jar containing the only good dream they had ever caught that day stood between them. The BFG, of great care and patience, was printing something on the paper with an enormous pencil. What are you writing? Sophie asked him. Every dream is having a special label on the bottle, the BFG said. How could I be finding the one I am wanting in a hurry? But you really, truly tell what sort of dream it's going to be simply by listening to it, Sophie asked. I can, the BFG said, not looking up. But how? Is it by the way it hums and buzzes? He was less more right. Every dream in the world is making a different sort of buzz, and the gram swag-boggling ears of mine is able to read that music. By music, do you mean tunes? I don't mean tunes. Then what do you mean? Human beings is having their own music, right or left? Right, Sophie said. Lots of music. And sometimes human beings is very overcome with these hearing of wondrous music. They is getting shivered down their spindles, right or left? Right, Sophie said. So the music is saying something to them, and is sending a message. I do not think the human beings is knowing what the message is, but they is loving it just the same. That's about right, Sophie said. But because of the dumb scribbling ears of mine, the BFG said, I is not only able to hear the music that the dreams is making, but I understand it also. What do you mean, understand it? Sophie said. I can read it, the BFG said. It talks to me. I'll find you that it's hard to believe. I'll bet you is also finding it hard to believe when quoting winkles, the BFG said. And how is this visiting from the stars? Of course I don't believe that. The BFG regarded her gravely with those huge eyes of his. I hope you will forgive me, he said, if I tell you that human beings is thinking they is very clever, but they is not. They is nearly all
to not munches and script Pete. I beg your pardon? The matter with human beings, the BFG went on, is that they's absolutely refusing to believe in anything unless they's actually seeing it right in front of them on snoozles. Of course, Pogwinkles is existing. I is only meeting them often. If I ever twittering to them, he turned away contemptuously from Soapy and resumed his writing. Soapy went over to read what he wrote so far. The letters were printed out in big bold letters, but were not very well formed. Here's what it said. The dream is about eyes having from my teacher from drowning. Eyes nearly into the river from a high brigade, and is dragging my teacher the bank, and then eyes giving him the kiss of death. The BFG or what? The BFG stopped writing and raised his head slowly. His eyes rested on Sophie's face. I was telling you once before, he said quietly, that I is never having a chance to go to school. I is full of mistakes. That is not my fault. I do my best. You is a lovely little girl, but please remember that you is not exactly what must know everything yourself. I'm sorry, Sophie said. I really am. It is very rude for me to keep correcting you. The BFG gazed at her for a while longer, and then he bent his head down once again. Tell me honestly, Sophie. If you believe this really and truly, start dreaming about how I saved my teacher from drowning off my diving bridge. More and more the BFG said, a lot more, but I cannot be scribbling the whole grope funking dream of an itchy bit of paper. Of course there is more. The BFG laid down his pencil and placed one massive ear close to his jaw. For about 30 seconds he listened intently. Yes, he said. Yes, and nodding his great head solemnly up and down, the dream is continuing very nice. It is very door-hunky candling. How does it end? Sophie asked. Please tell me. You would be dreaming, the BFG said, that the morning after you saved the teacher from the river, you is arriving at school and you is seeing all the 500 pupils sitting in the assembly hall, and all the teachers as well. And the head teacher is then standing up and saying, I was wanting the whole school to give 3 cheers for Sophie because she is so brave and is saving our life. Mrs. Figgins, who was unfortunately pushed off the bridge into the river by our gym teacher, Miss Amelia Scotch. So 3 cheers for Sophie, and the whole school is there, cheering like mad and shouting bravo, well done. And for even like that, and when you is getting your thumbs up, guts wiggling and muggled up, Mr. Figgins is always giving you 10 out of 10 and writing good work, so when you exercise, then waking you up. Of course you like it, the BFG said. As if Fizz was, he liked the back of the label and stuck up the jars. I was usually writing a bit more than this on the labels, he said, but he was watching me and making me jump, see. I'll go and sit somewhere. Don't go, he said. Look in the jar carefully, and I think you would be seeing this dream. Sophie peered into the jar, and there, sure enough, she saw the faint, translucent outline of something about the size of a hen's egg. There was just a touch of colour in it, a pale sea green, soft and shimmering, and very beautiful. There it lay, the small oblong sea green jellyfish thing at the bottom of the jar, quite peaceful, but pulsing gently, and the whole of moving in and out so slightly, as though it was breathing. It's moving, Sophie cried. It's alive. Of course it's alive. What will you feed it on? Sophie asked. It's not needing any food, the BFG told her. That's cruel, Sophie said. Everything alive needs food of some sort, even trees and plants. The northern wind is alive, the BFG said. It is moving, it touches you on the cheek and the hand, but nobody's feeding it. Sophie was silent. The extraordinary giant was disturbing her ideas. He seemed to be leading her towards mysteries that were beyond her understanding. A dream is not anything, the BFG went on. If it is a good one, it is waiting peacefully forever until it is released and allowed to do its job. If it is a bad one, it is always fighting to get out. The BFG stood up and walked over to one of the many shelves and placed the latest jar among the thousands of others. Please can I see some of the dreams, Sophie said. The BFG hesitated. Nobody's ever seen them before, he said. But perhaps, after all, I was letting you have a little peek. He picked her off the table and stood her on the palm of his hand. He carried her towards the shelves. Over here. I some of the good dreams, he said. The first wizards. Would you hold me closer so I can read the labels, Sophie said. My label is only telling bits of it, the BFG said. The dream is usually much longer. The label is to remind me. Sophie started to read the labels. The first one seemed long enough to her. It went right around the jar, and as she read it, she had to keep turning the jar. This is what it said. Today I was sitting in class and I discovered that it is I studying very hard at my math teacher. In a special way. I am able to put her to sleep, so I keep staring at her, and in the end, her head drops to her desk and she goes fast asleep and snorkels loudly. Then in marches the head teacher, and he shouts, "Wake up, Miss Palmgridge." "How dare you shout, wake up, Miss Palmgridge? How dare you go to sleep in class? So fetch your hat and coat and leave the school forever. You were sacked." But in jiffy, I was putting the head teacher to sleep as well, and he crumpled slowly to the floor like a lump of jelly, and there he lies in a heap upstairs, snorkeling even louder than his Miss Palmgridge. Then I hear my mummy's voice saying, "Wake up, your breakfast is ready." "What a funny dream," Sophie said. "It's a ring, Bella," so BFG said. "It's a whoopsie." Inside the jar, just below the edge of the label, Sophie could see the putting to sleep dream lying peacefully on the bottom, pulsing gently, sea green like the other. "Do you have separate dreams for boys and girls?" "Of course I do," the BFG said. "If I was having girls' dream to a boy, even if it was a really whoopsie girl's dream, the boy would be waking up and thinking what a rabuncle, grug-sludging old dream that was." "Boys would," Sophie said. "These here is all girls' dreams on the shelf," the BFG said. "Can I read a boy's dream?" "You can." And he lifted her to a higher shelf. The label in the nearest boy's dream jar read as follows: "I is making myself a marvelous pair of suction boots, and when I put them on I am able to walk straight up the kitchen wall and across the ceiling." While I was walking upside down on the ceiling when my big sister comes in, and she's starting to yell at me. She's always doing this, yelling, "What on earth is you doing there walking on the ceiling?" And I look down at her and I smile and say, "I told you you were driving me up the wall, and now you have done it." "I found that one rather silly," Sophie said. "Boys wouldn't," the BFG said, grinning. "It's another ring, Bella. Perhaps you have seen enough now." "Let me read another boy's one," Sophie said. Next label said, "The telephone rings in our house, and my father picks it up, and he says, in his very important telephone voice, 'Simpkins speaking.' Then his face goes white, and his voice goes all funny, and says, 'What? Who?' And he says, 'Yes, sir, I understand, sir, but surely it's me. It is you're wishing to speak to, sir, not my little son.' My father's face is going from white to dark purple, and is gulping like a lobster stuck in his throat, and then at last he is saying, 'Yes, sir, very well, I shall get him.' And he turns to me and he says in a rather respectful voice, 'Is you knowing the President of the United States?' And I says, 'No, but I expect he is hearing about me.' Then I is having a long talk on the phone and saying things like, 'Let me take care of it, Mr. President. You'll bungle it all up if you don't do it my way.' And my father's eyes goggling right out there on his head, and that is what I'm hearing my father's real voice saying, 'Get up, you lazy slob, or you'll be late for school.' Boys are crazy," Sophie said. "Let me read this next label." Sophie started reading the next label. I was having a bath and I discovered that if I press quite hard on my tummy button, a funny feeling comes over me, and suddenly my legs is not there, nor is my arms. In fact, I has become absolutely invisible all over. I is still there, but no one can see me, nor even myself. So my mummy comes in and says, "Where is that child? He wasn't there a minute ago, and he can't possibly have been washed himself properly." So I say, "Here he is," and she says, "Where?" And I say, "Here." And she says, "Where?" I say, "Here." She yells, "Henry, come up quick." And my daddy rushes in. And I is washing myself, and my daddy sees the soap floating around in the air, but of course he's not seeing me. And he shouts, "Where are you, boy?" And I say, "Here." And he says, "Where?" And I say, "Here." And he says, "Where?" And I say, "Here." And he says, "The soap. Boy, the soap is flying in the air." Then I press my tummy button again, and I say, "I'm invisible." But now I'm invisible. My daddy is grippy with excitement, and he says, "You's invisible, boy." And I says, "Now I is going to have some fun." So when I put it out of my bath, and I have dried myself up, and put on my dressing gown and slippers, and I press my tummy button again to become invisible, and I go down into the town and walk in the streets. Of course only me is invisible, but not the things I is wearing. So when people is seeing a dressing gown and slippers floating along the street with nobody in it, there's a panic, and everyone starts yelling, "A ghost, a ghost!" And people are screaming left and right, and big strong policemen is running for their lives, and best of all, I see Mr. Gromit, my algebra teacher, coming out of a pub, and I float up to him and say, "Boo," and he lets out a frightful howl and dashes back into the pub, and then I wake up and feeling happy as a squatter. "Pretty ridiculous," Sophie said. All the same, she couldn't resist reaching down and pressing her own tummy button to see if it worked. Nothing happened. Dreams is a very mystical thing, the BFG said.
Human beings is not understanding them at all. Not even their brainiest professors is understanding them. Have you seen one? Just this last one, Sophie said. This one here. She started reading. I has written a book, and it's so exciting nobody can put it down. As soon as you read it, the first line, you were so hooked on it you cannot stop until the last page. In all the cities, people is walking in the streets bumping into each other because their faces is buried in my book. And dentists are reading it and trying to fill their teeth at the same time. But nobody minds because they is all reading it too, in the dentist's chair. Drivers is reading it while driving, and cars is crashing all over the country. Brain surgeons is reading it while they are operating on the brains. On airline pilots is reading it going to the Timbuktu instead of London. Football players is reading it on the field because they can't put it down. And so is Olympic runners while they is running. Everybody has to see what is going to happen next in my book, and when I wake up, I is still tingling with excitement at being the greatest writer in the world that has ever known until my mummy comes in and says, I was looking at your English exercise book last night, and really your spelling is atrocious. So is your pentusilism. That's enough for now. There is zillions more, but my arms is getting tired holding you up. Where are you over there? Sophie said. Why have they got such tiny labels? The BFG said, it's because one day I is catching so many dreams. I is not having the time to enjoy the write out long labels. But there is not enough to remind me. Can I look? Sophie said. The long-suffering BFG carried her across the jars she was pointing to. Sophie read them rapidly, one after the other. I is climbing Mount Everest with just one pussycat-full company. I is inventing a car that runs on toothpaste. I is able to make the electric lights go on and off just by wishing it. I is only an 8-year-old little boy, but I is growing a splendid bushy beard, and all the other boys are jealous. I is able to jump off in any high window and float safely down. I has a pit that makes rocks and muskets when it flies. What amazes me, Sophie said, is how you ever learned to write in the first place. Ah, said the BFG. I had been wondering how long it has been before you were going to ask me that. Considering you never went to school, I think it's quite marvellous, Sophie said. How did you learn? The BFG crossed the cave and opened a tiny little secret book in the door. He took out a book, very old and tattered. By human standards, it was an ordinary-sized book, but it looked like a postage stamp in his huge hands. One night, he said, I was blowing a dream through a window, and I see the boy lying on the bedroom table. I wanted it so very badly. You understand? But I was refusing to steal it. I would never do that. So how did you get it? I borrowed it, the BFG said, smiling a little. Just for a short time I borrowed it. How long have you had it? Sophie asked. Perhaps about only 8 years, the BFG said. Soon I shall put it back. And that's how you taught yourself how to write? Sophie asked him. I have read it hundreds of times, the BFG said, and I'm still reading it and teaching new words to myself and how to write them. It is the most scribbly dumplish story ever. Sophie took the book out of his hand. Nicholas Nickleby, she read aloud, but Dahl's chickens, the BFG said. By whose? Just then, there came a tremendous noise of galloping feet outside the cave. What's that? Sophie cried. This is all the giants zip-viving off to another country to guggle human beings, the BFG said. He quickly popped Sophie into his waistcoat pocket, then hurried to the cave entrance and rolled back the stone. Sophie, peeping out of her spy hole, saw all 9 of the fearsome giants coming past as a full gallop. Where's you off to tonight? Shouted the BFG. We is all off flush bunking to England tonight, answering the flesh eaters as they went galloping past. England is luxurious land. We is fancying a few nice little English chidlers. I shouted the maid mashers, knowing where there is giggly house for girls, and I was guggling myself full of flothbrower. And I think there is a boggle books for boys. All I has to do is reach in and grab myself a handful. English boys is tasting extra licorice. In a few seconds, the 9 galloping giants were out of sight. What did he mean? Sophie said, poking her head out of her pocket. What is gigglish for girls? He is meaning a girls' school. The BFG said, he will be eating them by the bundle. Oh no, Sophie cried. And boys from a boys' school, said the BFG. It mustn't happen, Sophie cried. We've got to stop them. We can't just sit here and do nothing. There's nothing we can do, the BFG said. We're as helpless as horse feathers. He sat down on a large craggy blue rock near the entrance to his cave. He took Sophie from his pocket and put her beside him on the rock. It is quite safe for you to be outside until they are coming back. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and it was getting dark. The great plan. We've absolutely got to stop them. Put them back in your pocket, quick, and we'll chase after them, and warn everyone in England they're coming. Rendindunculous and possible, the BFG said.
They is going 2 times as fast as me. And they're guzzling before we is halfway. But we can just sit here doing nothing, Sophie cried. How many girls and boys are they gonna eat tonight? Many, the BFG said. The flesh lump eating giant alone has been squackling wopsy appetite. Will we snatch them out of their beds while they're sleeping, like peas out of a puddle? I can bear to think it. They don't, the BFG said. For years and years, I was sitting here on this very rock every night when they is galloping away, and I was feeling so sad for all the human beings that is being gobbled up. But I had to get used to it. There's nothing I can do. If it wasn't a titchy little rusty giant, only 24 feet. Then I would be stopping them. But that is absolutely out of the window. Do you always know where they're going? Sophie asked. Always, the BFG said. Every night they is yelling at me so that when they go bootling past. The other day they was yelling, we is off to Mississippi and Missouri to guzzle them both. Disgusting, Sophie said, and I hate them. She and the big friendly giant sat quietly side by side in the blue lock in the gathering dusk. Sophie had never felt helpless in her life. After she stood up and cried out, I can't stand it. Just think of all those poor girls and boys who are being eaten alive in 4 hours' time. We can't just sit here and do nothing. We've got to go after those brutes. No, the BFG said. We must, Sophie cried. Why won't you go? The BFG sighed and shook his head firmly. I have told you 5 or 6 times, and the 3rd will be the last. I has never shown myself to human beings. Why ever not? If I do, they will be putting me in the zoo with all the giraffes and caterpillars. Nonsense, Sophie said. And they will be sending you straight back to an orphanage, the BFG went on. Grown-up human beings is not famous for their kindness. There's all swift rottlers and grink sludges. That simply isn't true, Sophie cried. Some of them who are very kind indeed. Who, the BFG said. Name one. The Queen of England, Sophie said. You can't call her a squirrel rotter or grink sludger. Well, the BFG said. You can't call her squeak peep or not much either. Sophie said, angry and angrier. The flesh lump eater is longing dearly to guzzle her up, the BFG said. Who, the Queen? Sophie cried. Yes, the BFG. The flesh lump eater says he is never quitting the Queen. He is never eating the Queen, and he thinks perhaps she has an especially scumdelicious flavour. How dare he, Sophie said. But flesh lump eater says there's too many soldiers around her palace, and he daren't to try it. He better not. He is also saying that the world like very much to guzzle on one of the soldiers in the pretty red suit, but he is worried about those big black furry hats that he is wearing. He might worry that they might stick to his throat. I hope he chokes, Sophie said. Flesh lump eater is a very careful giant, the BFG said. Sophie was silent for a few moments. Then suddenly, in a voice filled with excitement, she cried, I've got it! By golly, I got it! I think I've got it! Got what? Asked the BFG. The answer, Sophie cried. We'll go see the Queen. It's a terrific idea. If I went and told the Queen about those disgusting man-eating giants, I'm sure she'd do something about it. The BFG looked down at her sadly and shook his head. She's never believing you, he said. Never in a month of Mondays. I think she would. Never, the BFG said. It is sounding such a wonky, tall story. The Queen would be saying and laughing, what awful rubbish. She would not. Of course she would, the BFG said. I was told you before the human beings is not simply believing in giants. It is up to us to find a way to make her believe. And how is you going to get the Queen anyways? Hold on a second, Sophie said. Just you hold on. Your ideas are full of scroddles, the BFG said. Not this one, Sophie said. You think if we tell the Queen she would ever believe us? I'm certain she wouldn't, the BFG said. But we aren't going to tell her, Sophie said excitedly. We don't have to tell her. We'll make it her dream it. That is an even more bungling suggestion, the BFG said. Dreams is lots of fun for everybody, but nobody's believing in dreams either. You're only believing in a dream while you actually is dreaming. But as soon as you wake up, you're saying, oh, thank goodness it was only a dream. Don't you worry about that part, Sophie said. I can fix it. Never can you fix it. I can. I swear it. But first of all, let me ask you a very important question. Here it is. Can you make a person dream absolutely anything in the world? Anything you like? The BFG said, probably loudly. If I said I wanted to dream that I was in a flying bathtub with silver wings, would you make me dream it? I could, the BFG said. But how? You obviously don't exactly know your dream in your collections. I do not. But I could soon be mixing it up. How could you be mixing up? It's like mixing up a cake, the BFG said. If you was putting the right amount of all the different things into it, you was making the cake come out in any way you want. Sugar, plongy, currenty, Christmassy, or grub switchy. It's the same with dreams. I has billions of dollars on my shelves, right or left? Right, Sophie said. I has dreams of bathtubs, lots of them. I has dreams of silver wings. I have dreams of flying. So all I need to do is mix those dreams together in the proper way. And I was very quickly able, making a dream where you was in a flying bathtub with silver wings. I see what you mean, Sophie said. But I don't know you could mix one dream with another. Dreams like being mixed, the BFG said. They're getting very lonesome all by themselves in those glassy bottles. Right, Sophie said. Now, and do you have any dreams about the Queen of England? Lots of them, the BFG said. And other giants? Of course, the BFG said. And about giants eating people, squiggles of them, and about little girls like me? Those are most common of all, the BFG said. I has bottles and bottles of dreams about little girls, and you can mix them all up just as you want to, Sophie asked. Getting more excited and excited, of course, the BFG said. But how is this helping us? I think you was barking up the wrong dog. Now hold on, Sophie said. Listen carefully. I want you to mix a dream that you will blow into the Queen of England's bedroom when she's asleep. And this is how it will go. Now hang on a metric, the BFG said. How is I supposedly able to go near enough to the Queen of England's bedroom to blow in my dream? You is talking dumb, silly. I'll tell you that later, Sophie said. For the moment, please listen carefully. Here's the dream that I want you to mix. Are you paying attention? Very closely, the BFG said. I want the Queen to dream that 9 disgusting giants, each one about 50 feet tall, are galloping to England in the night. She must be dreaming the names as well. What are their names? Flesh Lump Eater, the BFG said. Manhunger, Bone Cruncher, Child Chewer, Meat Dripper, Gizzard Gulper, Mad Masher, Blood Butler, and the Butcher Boy. Let her dreams all those names, Sophie said, and let her dream that they will be creeping into England in the depths of the witching hour and snatching little boys and girls from their beds. Let her dream that they will be reaching the bedroom windows and pulling the little boys and girls out of their beds, and then, Sophie paused, do they eat them on the spot or do they carry them away first? They usually put them straight into their mouths like popcorn, the BFG said. Put that in the dream, Sophie said. And then, the dream must say, when their tummies are full, they will go galloping back to the giant country where no one can find them at all. Is that all? The BFG said. Certainly not. You must then explain to the Queen in her dream that there is a big friendly giant who can tell her where all those beasts are living, so that she can send her soldiers and armies to capture them all at once. And now let her dream one last and very important thing. Let her dream that there's a little girl called Sophie sitting on the windowsill who will tell her where the big friendly giant is hiding. Where is he hiding? Asked the BFG. We'll come to that later, Sophie said. So the Queen dreams a dream, right? Right, the BFG said. And she wakes up and the first thing she thinks is, what a horrid dream. I'm so glad it was only a dream. And she looks up from her pillow. And what does she see? What does she see? The BFG said. She sees a little girl called Sophie sitting on the windowsill, right there in the real life before her very eyes. How are you going to be sitting on the Queen's windowsill, may I beg? The BFG said. You are going to put me there, Sophie said. And that's the lovely part about it. If someone dreams that there's a little girl sitting on her windowsill, and she wakes up and sees the little girl really is sitting there, that is a dream come true or not? I was beginning to see where you was driving it to, the BFG said. The Queen is knowing that part of her dream is true, then perhaps she is believing the rest of the dream as well. That's about it, Sophie said, but I shall have to convince her myself. You said you was wanting the dreams to say that there's a big friendly giant who is going to talk to the Queen. Absolutely, Sophie said. You must. You're the only one who can tell her where to find the other giants. How is I meeting the Queen? Said the BFG. I was not wanting to be shooted by her by his shoulders. The soldiers are only in the front of the palace, Sophie said. At the back there's a huge garden, and there's no soldiers there at all. There's a very high wall with spikes on around the garden to stop people climbing, but you can simply walk over that. How's you knowing all about the Queen's palace? The BFG said. Last year I was in a different orphanage, Sophie said. It was in London, and we used to go for walks all around there. Is you helping me to find the place? The BFG said. I was never dared to go hide and sneak around London in my life. I'll show you the way, Sophie said confidently. I was frightened of London, the BFG said. Don't be afraid, Sophie said. It's full of tiny dark streets and there are very few people in the witching hour. The BFG picked Sophie up on one finger and the thumb and placed her gently on the palm of the other hand. Is the Queen's palace very huge? He asked. Huge, Sophie said. Then how is we find the right bedroom? That's up to you, Sophie said. You're supposed to be an expert on that sort of thing. And you was absolutely sure the Queen would not put me in a zoo with all the caterpillars? Of course she won't. You'll be a hero and you'll never be eaten by snoozcumbers again. Sophie saw the BFG's eyes widen. He licked his lips. You mean it, he said. You really mean it? No more digestive snoozcumbers? You couldn't get one if you wanted to, Sophie said. Humans don't grow them. That did it. The BFG got to his feet. When is you wanting me to mix a special dream, he asked. Now, Sophie said. At once. When is we going to see the Queen? He said. Tonight, Sophie said. As soon as you mix the dream. Tonight? The BFG said. Why such a flash-bunking flurry? If we can't save tonight's children, we can anyway save tomorrow, Sophie said. What is more, I'm getting famished. I haven't had a thing to eat for 24 hours. Then we better get crackling, the BFG said, moving towards the cave. Sophie kissed him on the tip of his thumb. I knew you'd do it, she said. Come on, let's hurry. Mixing the dreams. It was dark now. The night had already begun. The BFG with Sophie sitting on his hand hurried into the cave and put on those brilliant bright lights that seemed to come from nowhere. He placed Sophie on the table. Stay there, please, he said. And no chittering. I is needing to listen only to silence when I was mixing up such a naughty, pixelated dream at this. He hurried away from her. He got an enormous empty glass jar. That was the size of a washing machine. He clutched it to his teeth and his chest and hurried towards the shelves on which stood the thousands and thousands of smaller jars containing the captured dreams. Dreams about giants, he muttered to himself as he searched the labels. The giants guzzling human beings. No, not that one. Here's another one. And here's another. He grabbed the dreams and unscrewed the tops. He tipped the dreams into the enormous jar, and it was clutching as each one went in. Sophie caught a glimpse of a small sea-green blob tumbling from one jar to another. The BFG hurried towards another shelf. Now, he muttered, I was wanting dreams about giggly houses for girls and about boku houses for boys. He was becoming very tense now. Sophie could almost see the excitement bubbling inside him as he scurried back and forth among his beloved jars. There must have been 55,000 dreams altogether up there on the shelves, but he seemed to know almost exactly where every one of them was. Dreams about a little girl, he muttered, and dreams about me, about the BFG. Come on, hurry up and get on with it now. Where in the wonky world is I keeping those? And so I went on. In about half an hour, the BFG had found all the dreams he wanted and had tipped them in a huge jar. He put the jar on the table, and Sophie sat there watching him but said nothing. Inside the jar, lying on the bottom of it, she could clearly see about 50 of those sea-green jellyfish shapes, all pulsing gently in and out, some laying on top of each other, while the other still quite separate individual dream. Now where's mixing them, the BFG said. He went to the cupboard where he kept his bottle Rob Scottle, and from it he took a giant egg beater. It was one of those that had a handle when you turn, and down below there was a lot of overlapping blades that go whizzing out. He inserted the bottom end of his contraption into the big jar when the dreams were lying. Watch, he said. He started turning the handle very fast. Flashes of green and blue exploded inside the lights. The dreams were being whisked into a sea-green froth. The poor thing, Sophie cried. They're not feeling it, the BFG said as he turned the handle. Dreams is not like human beings or animals. They has no brain. They is made of zombiness. After a minute, the BFG stopped whisking. The whole bottle was now full to the brim. About large bubbles. They were almost exactly like the bubbles we ourselves blow from soapy water, except these had even brighter and more beautiful colours swimming on the surfaces. Keep watching, the BFG said. Quiet, slowly, the topmost bubble rose up through the neck of the jar and floated away. A second one followed, then a third and a fourth. Soon the cave was filled with hundreds of beautiful coloured bubbles, all drifting gently from the air. It was truly a wonderful sight. As Sophie watched them, they all started floating towards the cave entrance, which was still open. They're going out, Sophie whispered. Of course, the BFG said. Where to? This is a little tiny dream bits that ain't I using, the BFG said. This is going back to the misty country to join up the proper dreams. It's a bit beyond me, Sophie said. Dreams is not full of mysteries and magic, the BFG said. Do not try to understand them. Look in the big bottle and you will now see the dream you was wanting to the Queen.
Sophie turned and stared to the great jar on the bottom of it. Something was thrashing out wildly, bouncing up and down, flinging itself against the walls of the jar. Good heavens, she cried. Is that it? That's it, the BFG said proudly. But it's horrible, Sophie cried. It's jumping about. I want to get it. That's because it's a troggle humper, the BFG said. It's a nightmare. Oh, but I don't want to give a queen a nightmare, Sophie said. If she's dreaming about giants guzzling up boys and girls, then what are you expecting to expect? A nightmare, the BFG said. Oh no, Sophie cried. Oh yes, the BFG said. A dream where you are seeing little Charlies being eaten is one of the most frightsome troggle humping dreams you can get. It's a Kixie bog thumper, it's a Roopsie grub switcher. It is all of them riddled into one. It is a bad dream as the bad dream I blew into the thrush lump eater this afternoon. It is worse. Sophie stared down at the fearful nightmare dream that was still thrashing away in the huge glass jar. It was much larger than the others. It was about the size of the shape we should all call a turkey egg. It was jellyfish. I tingles of bright scarlet deep inside. There was something terrible at the way it was throwing itself against the sides of the jar. I don't want to give the queen a nightmare, Sophie said. I stink in the BFG said. And your queen will be happy to have a nightmare. If having a nightmare is going to save a lot of human beings from being gobbled up by fulsome giants, is it right or left? I suppose you're right, Sophie said. It's not going to be, but it's got to be done. She will soon be getting over it, the BFG said. Have you put all your other important things into it? Sophie asked. When I is blowing the dream into the queen's bedroom, the BFG said, she will be dreaming every single little thing-a-ling you is asking me to make her dream about. About me sitting in the windowsill, that part is very strong. And about a big friendly giant, I was putting in a nice long gibbet about him, the BFG said. As he spoke, he picked up one of his smaller jars and very quickly tipped the struggling Thrasham troggle humper out of the large jar into the small one. Then he screwed the lid tight onto the small jar. That's it, he announced. We is ready now. He fetched his suitcase and put the small jar into it. Why bother to take a great big suitcase when you've only got one jar? Sophie said. You should put the jar in your pocket. The BFG looked down at her and smiled. Bye, Goggles, he said, taking the jar out of the suitcase. Your head is not quite so full of grime and sludge after all. I can see you was not born last week. Thank you, kind sir, Sophie said, making a little curtsy from the tabletop. Is ready you to leave? The BFG asked. I'm ready, Sophie cried. Her heart was beginning to thump at the thought of what they were going to do. It was really a wild and crazy thing. Perhaps they would be thrown into the prison. The BFG was putting on his great black cloak. He tucked the jar into his pocket in his cloak. He picked up the long trumpet like a dream blower. Then he turned and looked at Sophie. He was still on the tabletop. The dream bottle is my picnic, he said. Is you gonna sit in there with it during the travel? Never, cried Sophie. I refuse to sit next to the beastly thing. Then what is you gonna sit? The BFG asked. Sophie looked at him for a few moments. Then she said, if you would be kind enough to swivel one of your lovely big ears so that it's lying flat like a dish, that would make a very cozy place for me to sit. By gumbo, that is a squackling good idea, the BFG said. Slowly he swiveled his right ear, and it was until like a great shell facing the heavens. He lifted high Sophie up into the air. The air itself, which was about the size of a large tea tray, was full up the same channel and crinkles as a human ear. It was extremely comfortable. I hope I don't fall down your ear hole, Sophie said, edging away from the large hole just beside her. Be very careful not to do that, the BFG said. You should be giving me a cronking earache. The nice thing about being there was she could whisper directly to his ear. You's tickling me a bit, the BFG said. Please do not jiggle about. I'll try not to, Sophie said. Are we ready? Ow! Yelled the BFG. Don't do that. I didn't do anything, Sophie said. You was talking too loud. You was forgetting that I is hearing every little thing-a-ling 50 times louder than usual. And there's nothing you can do about it. Oh gosh, Sophie murmured. I forgot that. Your voice is like thunder and trumpets. I'm so sorry, Sophie whispered. Is that better? No, cried the BFG. It sounds as though you shooting off the blunderbuss. And how can I talk to you? Sophie whispered. Don't, cried the poor BFG. Please don't. Each word is like dropping a buzz bomb in my ear hole. Sophie tried speaking right under her breath. Is this better? She spoke so softly she couldn't even hear her own voice. That's better, the BFG said. Now I is hearing you very nicely. What is it you're trying to tell me just now? I was saying, are we ready? We is off, cried the BFG, heading for the cave entrance. We is off to Her Majesty the Queen. Outside the cave, he rolled a large round stone back into place and set off at a tremendous gallop. Journey to London. The great yellow wasteland lay dim and milky in the moonlight. As the big friendly giant went galloping across it, Sophie, still wearing her only nightie, was reclined comfortably into a crevice of the BFG's right ear. She was actually in the outer rim of the ear near the top where the edge of the earfolds were, and hanging off the bit made of a soft roof for her and gave her a wonderful protection against the rushing wind. What is more, she was lying on the skin that was soft and warm and almost velvety. Nobody, she told herself, had ever travelled in greater comfort. Sophie peeped over the rim of the ear and watched the desolate landscape of the giant country go whizzing by. They were actually moving fast. The BFG went bouncing off the ground as though they were rockets in his toes. And each stride he took lifted him up about 100 feet in the air, but he had not yet gone into the whizzing top gear of his, with which the ground became blurred by the speed, and the wind howled, and his feet didn't come to touch anything but air. That would come later. Sophie had not slept for a long time. She was very tired, and she was also warm and comfortable. She dozed off. She didn't know how to sleep. But when she woke up again and looked over the edge of the car, the landscape had become completely changed. They were in a green country now, with mountains and forests. It was still dark and the moon was shining as brightly as ever. Suddenly, without slowing his pace, the BFG turned his head sharp to the left for the first time during the entire journey as he spoke. "Look, quick, quick, over there," he said, pointing his long trumpet. Sophie looked in the direction he was pointing through the murky darkness. All she saw was at first a great cloud of dust about 300 yards away. Then other giants all galloping back home after the guzzle, the BFG said. Then Sophie saw them in the light of the moon. She saw all 9 of the monstrous half-naked brutes thundering across the landscape together. They were galloping in a pack, and their necks craned forward, their arms bent at the elbows, and worst of all, their stomachs bulging. Their strides were incredibly pounded. Their feet and thundered on the ground, and they left a sheet of dust behind them. But in 10 seconds, they were gone. "A lot of girlies and boyslies is no longer sleeping in their beds tonight," the BFG said. Sophie felt quite ill. The grim encounter made her none more than ever determined to go through with her mission. It must have been about an hour or later that the BFG began to slow his pace. "We in England now," he said suddenly. Dark through it was. Sophie could see that they were in a country of green fields. Neat inside, in between the fields, there were hills and trees all across. Occasionally, there were roads and the lights and cars moving along. Each time they came to a road, the BFG was over it and away, and no motorist could possibly have seen anything except a black shadow flashing overhead. All at once, orange color glow shaped in the night sky ahead of them. "We is coming close to London," the BFG said. He slowed to a trot. He began looking about cautiously. Groups of houses were now appearing on all sides, but there were still no lights in the windows yet. It was too early for anyone to be getting up yet. "Someone bound to see us," Sophie said. "Never is they gonna see me," the BFG said confidently. "You was getting their eyes doing this sort of thing for years and years and years. No human being is ever catching even the smallest wink of me." "I did," Sophie whispered. "I said yes, but you were the very first." During the next hour and a half, things moved so swiftly and so silently that Sophie, crouched in the giant's ear, was unable to understand exactly what was going on. They were in streets. There were houses everywhere. Sometimes there were shops. There were bright lamps in the streets. There were quite a few people about, and there were cars and lights on. But nobody ever noticed the BFG. It was quite impossible to understand quite how he did it. There was a kind of magic in his movements. He seemed to melt the shadows. He would glide. That would be the only word to describe his moving. He would glide noiselessly from one dark place to another, always moving, always gliding forwards towards the streets of London, his black cloak blending with the shadows of the night. It is quite possible that the 1 or 2 night wanderers might have thought they saw a tall black shadow skimming swiftly through a murky side street. But even if they had, they would never have believed their own eyes. They would dismiss it as an illusion and blame themselves for seeing things that weren't there. Sophie and the BFG came at last to a large place full of trees. There were a road running through it, and a lake. There were no people in the place, and the BFG stopped for the first time since they had set out from the cave for many hours. "What's the matter?" Sophie whispered under her breath. "I is in a bit of a puddle." "You're doing marvellously," Sophie whispered. "No, I isn't," he said. "I is now completely boggled. I lost." "But why?" "Because we is meant to be in the middle of London, and suddenly we is in green pastures." "Don't be silly," Sophie whispered. "This is the middle of London. It's called Hyde Park. I know exactly where we are." He was joking. "I'm not. Swear I'm not. We're almost there." "You mean we're almost nearly at the Queen's Palace?" cried the BFG. "It's just across the road," Sophie whispered. "This is where I take over." "Which way?" the BFG asked. "Straight ahead." The BFG forwarded us through the deserted park. "Now stop." The BFG stopped. You see the huge roundabout ahead of us, just outside the park, Sophie whispered. I see it. That is Hyde Park Corner. Even now, when it was still an hour before dawn, there was quite a lot of traffic moving around Hyde Park Corner. Then Sophie whispered, in the middle of the roundabout, there's an enormous stone arch with a statue of a horse riding on top of it. Can you see that? The BFG peered through the trees. Aye, seeing it, he whispered. Do you think if you take a very fast run at it, you could jump clear over Hyde Park Corner, over the arch and over the horse and rider, and land on the pavement on the other side? Easy, the BFG said. You're sure? You're absolutely sure? I promise, the BFG said. Whatever you do, you mustn't land in the middle of the Hyde Park Corner. Don't get so flustered, the BFG said. To me, that is a snitchy little jump. That's not a thing-a-ling to it. Then go, Sophie whispered. The BFG broke into a full gallop and he went scorching across the park, and just before he reached the railings that divided it from the street, he took off. It was a gigantic leap. He flew over Hyde Park Corner and landed as softly as a cat on the pavement to the other side. Well done, Sophie whispered. Now quick, over that wall. Directly in front of them, bordering the pavement, there was a brick with a fearsome-looking spike all over along the top of it. A swish, crouch, a little leap, and the BFG was over it. We're there, Sophie whispered excitedly. We're in the Queen's back garden. The palace. By gumdrops, whispered the big printing giant. Is this really it? There's the palace, Sophie whispered back. Not more than 100 yards away. Through the tall trees in the garden, across the mown lawns and the tidy flower beds, and the massive shape of the palace itself loomed the darkness. It was made of whitish stone. The sheer size of it staggered the BFG, with its places having 100 bedrooms at least, he said. Easily, I should think, Sophie whispered. Then I boggled. The BFG said, How is it possible, finding the one where the Queen is sleeping? Let's go a bit closer and have a look, Sophie whispered. The BFG forwarded among the trees. Suddenly, he stopped dead. The great area in which Sophie was sitting began to swivel. Hey, Sophie whispered. You're going to tip me. Out. Shh, the BFG whispered. I was hearing something. He stopped behind a clump of bushes. He waited. The car was still swinging the way, and that Sophie had to hang on tight to the side of it to save herself from tumbling. The BFG pointed through a gap of bushes, and there, no more than 50 yards away, he saw a man paddling softly across the lawn. He had a guard dog with him on a leash. The BFG stayed still at his tone. So did Sophie. The man and the dog walked and disappeared into the darkness. You was telling me they had no soldiers in the back garden, the BFG said. He wasn't a soldier, Sophie whispered. He was sort of a watchman. We'll have to be careful. I was not too worried, the BFG said. These wackeries big ears of mine is gonna pick up even the noise of a man breathing the other side of the garden. How much longer before it begins to get light? Sophie whispered. Very short, the BFG said. We must go. Pow now for later now. He glided forward through the vast garden, and once again Sophie noticed how he had to mount into the shadows wherever he went. His feet made no sound at all, even when he was walking on gravel. Suddenly, they were right up close against the back of the great palace. The BFG's head was level with the upper windows, one flight up, and Sophie sitting on this air, and the same view. In all the windows on that, the floor and the curtains seemed to be drawn. There was no light showing anywhere. In the distance, they could hear the muted sounds of a traffic going by Hyde Park. The BFG stopped and put its other ear, the other one Sophie wasn't sitting on, close to the window. No, he whispered. What are you listening for? Sophie whispered back. For breathing, the BFG said. I was able to tell if it was a man, human being, or a lady by the breathing voice. We has a man in there, snorkeling a little bit. He glided on, flattening his tail, thin, black-cloaked, body against the side of the building. He came to the next window. He listened. No, he whispered. He moved on. The room is empty, he whispered. He listened at several more windows, but at each one he shook his head and moved on. When he came to the window in the very center of the palace, he listened, but he did not move on. Ho, ho, he whispered. Was a lady sleeping in there? Sophie felt a quiver running back her spine. But who? She whispered. The BFG put a finger on his lips for silence. Silence. He reached up through the open window and parted the curtains ever so slightly. The orange glow from the night sky over London crept into the room, and a cast of glimmer of light onto its walls. It was a large room, a very large room. A rich carpet, glided chairs, a dressing table, a bed. On the pillow of the bed lay the head of a sleeping woman. Sophie suddenly found herself looking at a face she had seen on stamps and the coins in the newspapers all her life. For a few seconds, she was speechless. Is that her? The BFG whispered. Yes, Sophie whispered back. The BFG wasted no time. First, and very carefully, he started to raise the larger, lower of the large window. The BFG was an expert on windows. He had opened thousands of them over the years to blow his dreams into children's bedrooms. Some creaked. He was pleased to find that the Queen's window could easily be slid upwards like silk. He pushed the lower half as far as it would go down, as to leave a place on the sill for Sophie to sit. Next, he closed the crack in the curtains. Then, with a thumb and a finger, he lifted Sophie out of his ear and placed it on the ledge. "Now, don't you go toppling backwards," the BFG whispered. "You must always be holding on tight with both hands onto the inside of the windowsill." Sophie did as he said. It was summertime in London, and the night was not cold, but don't forget that Sophie was wearing only her nightie. She could not have given anything for a dressing gown. Not just to keep her warm, but to hide the whiteness of her nightie from the watchful eyes of the garden below. The BFG was taking the glass jar from the pocket in his cloak. He unscrewed the lid. Now, very cautiously, he poured the precious dream into the wide end of his trumpet. He steered the trumpet through the curtains, far into the room, aiming at the place where he knew the bed to be. He took a deep breath. He puffed his cheeks out, and poof, he blew. Now he was withdrawing the trumpet, sliding out very carefully like a thermometer. "Is you all right sitting there?" "Yes," Sophie murmured. She was quite terrified, but determined not to show it. She looked down her shoulder. The ground seemed miles away. It was nasty. "How long would the dream take to work?" Sophie whispered. "Some takes hours," the BFG whispered back. "Some is quicker, some is slower still. But it is sure to find her in the end." Sophie said nothing. "I is going off to wait in the garden," the BFG whispered. "When you is wanting me, just call out my name, and I is coming very quick." "Will you hear me?" Sophie whispered. "You is forgetting these," the BFG whispered, smiling and pointing to his giant ears. "Goodbye," Sophie whispered. Suddenly, unexpectedly, the BFG leaned forward and kissed her gently on the cheek. Sophie felt like crying. When she turned to look at him, he was already gone. He had simply melted away into the darkness garden. The Queen. Down came at last, and the rim of a lemon-coloured sun rose up beyond the roof's top somewhere behind Victoria Station. A while later, Sophie felt a little of its warmth on her back and was grateful. In the distance, she could hear a church clock striking. She counted the strikes. There were 7. She found it impossible to believe that she, Sophie, a little orphan of no real importance in the world, was at this moment actually sitting high above the ground on the windowsill of the Queen of England's bedroom, with the Queen herself sleeping there behind the curtain, was not more than 5 yards away. The very idea of it was absurd. No one had ever done such a thing before. It was a terrifying thing to do. What would happen if the dream didn't work? No one, least of all the Queen, would believe a word of the story. It seemed possible that nobody had ever woken up to find a small child sitting behind the curtains on his or her windowsill. The Queen was bound to get the shock. Who wouldn't? With all the patience of a small girl who has something important to wait for, Sophie sat motionless on the windowsill. How much longer, she wondered. What time do queens wake up? Faint stirring and distant sounds came to her from deep inside the belly of the palace. Then all at once, beyond the curtains, she heard the voice of the sleeper in the bedroom. It was a slightly blurred sleep talker. "Oh no," it cried out. "No, don't stop them. Don't let them do it. I can't bear it. Oh, please stop them. It's horrible. Oh no, it's ghastly." "She's having a dream," Sophie told herself. "It must be really hard. I feel so sorry for her. But it has to be done." After that, there were a few moans. Then there was a long silence. Sophie waited. She looked over her shoulder. She was terrified that she would see the man with the dog down in the garden, staring up at her. But the garden was deserted. A pale summer mist hung over her, like smoke. It was an enormous garden, very beautiful. There was an island in the lake, and there were ducks swimming in the water. Inside the room beyond the curtains, Sophie suddenly heard what obviously on the knock of the door. She saw a doorknob being turned. She heard someone enter the room. "Good morning, Your Majesty," a woman was saying. It was the voice of an oldish person. There was a pause and a slight rattle of china and silver. "Will you have your tray on the bed, ma'am, or not on the table?" "Oh, Mary, something awful just happened." This was a voice Sophie had heard many times on radio and television, especially on Christmas Day. It was a really well-known voice. "Whatever it is, ma'am." "I just had the most frightful dream. It was a nightmare. It was awful." "Oh, I'm so sorry, ma'am." "Don't be distressed. You're awake now, and it'll go away." "It was only a dream, ma'am." "Do you know what I dreamed, Mary?" "I dreamed the girls and boys were being snatched out of their hands by beds at boarding school, and were being eaten by the most ghastly giants. The giants were putting their arms in and out of the dormitory windows and plucking them out with their fingers. One lot from a girls' school, and another from a boys' school. It was so vivid, Mary. It was so real. There's a silence.
Sophie waited. She was quivering with excitement. But why the silence? Why did the other one, the maid, why did she say something? What's the matter, Mary? The famous voice was saying. There's another silence. Mary, you've got as white as a sheet. Are you feeling ill? There was a sudden crash and shatter of crockery, which could only have meant the tray the maid was carrying had fallen out of her hands. Mary, the famous voice was saying, rather sharply, I think you'd better sit down at once. You mustn't take it so hard because I've had an awful dream. That isn't the reason, ma'am. The maid's voice was shivering. Then for heaven's sakes, what is it? I'm very sorry about the tray, ma'am. Oh, don't worry about the tray. But what on earth made you drop it? Why'd you go white as a ghost? You haven't seen the papers yet, have you, ma'am? No, what do they say? So we heard the rustling of a newspaper as it was being handed over. It's like the very dream you had in the night, ma'am. Rubbish, Mary. Where is it? On the French page, ma'am. It's in the big headlines. Great Scott, the boy said. 18 girls vanished mysteriously from the beds at Roaldine schools. 14 boys disappeared from Eton. Bones are found underneath dormitory windows. Then there was a pause, punctuated by gasps from the famous voice, as the newspaper article was clearly being read and digested. Oh, how nasty, the famous voice cried out. It's absolutely frightening. Bones under the windows? What can have happened? All those poor children. Oh, ma'am, don't you see, ma'am? See what, ma'am? Those children were taken away, almost exactly as you dreamed it, ma'am. Not by giants, Mary. No, ma'am. But the bit about the girls and boys disappearing from the dormitories you dreamed is so clearly, and that it actually happened. That's why I came over all queer, ma'am. I'm coming over a bit queer myself, Mary. It gives me the shakes, ma'am, when something like that happens. It really does. I don't blame you, Mary. I shall get you some breakfast, ma'am, and have this mess cleared up. No, don't go, Mary. Stay here a moment. Sophie wished she could see into the room, but she didn't dare touch the curtains. The famous voice began speaking. I really did dream about those children, Mary. It was clear as crystal. I know you did, ma'am. I don't know giants got into it. That was rubbish. Shall I draw the curtains, ma'am? Then we shall all feel better. It's a lovely day. Please do. With a swish, the great curtains were pulled aside. The maid screamed. Sophie froze to the window ledge. The queen, sitting up in her bed, the tunes on her lap, glanced up sharply. Now it was her turn to freeze. She didn't scream as the maid had done. Queens are too self-controlled for that. She simply sat there, staring wide-eyed and white-faced at the small girl who was perched on the windowsill in a nightie. Sophie was petrified. Curiously, the queen looked petrified too. One would have expected her to look surprised, as I would have done had we discovered a small girl sitting on a windowsill for the first time in the morning. But the queen didn't look surprised. She looked genuinely frightened. The maid, a middle-aged woman with a funny cap on top of her head, was the first to recover. What in the name of heaven do you think you're doing here? She shouted angrily at Sophie. Sophie looked beseeching towards the queen for help. The queen was staring at Sophie, gaping her. Would be more accurate. Her mouth was slightly open. Whole her face and rather lovely face was filled with disbelief. Now listen here, young lady. How on earth did you get into this room? The maid shouted furiously. I don't believe it, the queen was murmuring. I simply don't believe it. I'll take her out, ma'am, at once. The maid was saying. No, Mary, don't do that. The queen was so sharply that the maid was quite taken aback. She turned and stared at the queen. What on earth had come over her? It looked as though she was shocked. Are you all right, ma'am? The maid was saying. When the queen spoke again, with a strange sort of whisper. Tell me, Mary, she said. Tell me quite truthfully. Is that really a little girl sitting on my windowsill, or am I still dreaming? She's sitting there all right, ma'am, as clear as daylight, but even only knows how she got there, your majesty. It's certainly not dreaming this time. That's exactly what I did dream, the queen said. I dreamed that as well. I dreamed there would be a little girl sitting on my windowsill in a nightie, and she would talk to me. The maid, with her hands clasped across her starched bison, was staring at her mistress with a look of absolute disbelief on her face. The situation was getting beyond her control. She was lost. She was not trained to cope with such madness. Are you real? The queen said to Sophie. Yes, your majesty, Sophie murmured. What is your name? Sophie, your majesty. And how did you get on my windowsill? No, don't answer that. Hang on a moment. I dreamed that part up too. I dreamed that a giant put you there. He did, your majesty, Sophie said. The maid gave a howl of anguish and clasped her hand over her face. Control yourself, Mary, the queen said sharply. Then to you, Sophie said. You're not serious about the giants, are you? Oh, yes, your majesty. He's out there in the garden. Now, is he indeed? The queen said. The sheer absurdity of it all was helping her to gain her composure. So he's in the garden, is he? She said, smiling a little. He's a good giant, your Majesty, Sophie said. You need not to be frightened of him. I'm delighted to hear it. Queen still smiling. He's my best friend, your Majesty. How nice, the Queen said. He's a lovely giant, your Majesty. I'm quite sure he is, the Queen said. Why have you and your giant come to see me? I think you've dreamed that part of it too, your Majesty, Sophie said calmly. That pulled the Queen up short and took the smile right off her face. A certain dream had that part of it. She was remembering now about the end of her dream. It had said that a little girl and a big friendly giant would come over and show her how to find the 9 horrible man-eating giants. But be careful, the Queen told herself. Keep very calm, because this is surely not from the place where madness begins. You did dream that, didn't you, your Majesty? The maid was out of it now. She stood there giggling. Yes, the Queen murmured. Yes, now you came to mention it. I did, but how do you know what I dreamed? Oh, that's a long story, your Majesty, Sophie said. Would you like me to call the big friendly giant? The Queen looked at the child. The child looked straight back at the Queen, her face open and quite serious. The Queen simply didn't know what to make of it. Was someone pulling her leg? She wondered. Shall I call him for you, your Majesty? Sophie went on. You'll like him very much. The Queen took a deep breath. She was glad no one except her faithful old Mary was here to see what was going on. Very well, she said. You may call your giant. Oh, wait a moment, Mary. Pull yourself together and give me a dressing gown and slippers. The maid did as she was told. The Queen got out of her bed and made a pale pink dressing gown and slippers. You may call him now, the Queen said. Sophie turned her head towards the garden and called out, BFG! Her Majesty the Queen will look to see you. The Queen crossed over to the window and stood beside Sophie. Come down off that ledge, she said. They're going to fall backwards any moment. Sophie jumped down into the room and stood beside the Queen and opened the window. Mary, the maid, stood behind her. Her hands were now planted firmly on her hips, and there was a look on her face which seemed to say, I don't want for any part of this fiasco. I don't see any giant, the Queen said. Please wait, Sophie said. Shall I take her away now, ma'am? The maid said, take her downstairs and give her some breakfast, the Queen said. Just then there was a rustle in the bushes beside the lake. Then out he came, 24 feet tall, wearing his black coat with a grace of nobleman, still carrying his long trumpet over his hand. He strode magnificently across the palace lawn towards the window. The maid screamed. The Queen gasped. Sophie waved. The BFG took his time. He was very dignified in his approach. When he was close to the window, where 3 of them were standing, he stopped and made a graceful bow. His head, after he had straightened up again, was almost exactly level with the watchers at the window. Your Majesty, he said, I is your humble servant. He bowed down. Considering she was meeting the giant for the first time, the Queen remained astonishingly self-composed. We are very pleased to meet you, she said. Down below, a gardener was coming across the lawn with a wheelbarrow. He caught sight of the BFG's legs. Over to his left, his gaze travelled slowly upwards along the entire height of the enormous body. He gripped the handles of the wheelbarrow. He swayed. He tottered, then kneeled over onto the grass in a dead faint. Nobody noticed him. "O Majesty," cried the BFG, "O Queen, O Monarchy, O Golden Sovereign, O Ruler of Straight Lines, O Sultana, I was coming here with my little friend Sophie to give you a—" The BFG hesitated, searching for the word. "To give me what?" the Queen said. "Assistance," the BFG said, beaming. The Queen looked puzzled. "He sometimes speaks a bit funny, Your Majesty," Sophie said. "He never went to school." "Then we must send him to school," the Queen said. "There are some very good schools in this country." "I have great secrets to tell you, Your Majesty," the BFG said. "I should be delighted to hear them," the Queen said, "but not in my dressing gown." "Shall you wish to get dressed, ma'am?" the maid said. "Have you ever had breakfast?" the Queen said. "Oh, could we?" Sophie asked. "Oh, please. I haven't eaten a thing yesterday." "I was about to have mine," the Queen said, but Mary dropped it. The maid gulped. "I imagine we have more food in the palace," the Queen said, speaking to the BFG. "Perhaps you and your little friend would care to join me. Would it be repulsant snooze-cumbers, Magister?" the BFG asked. "What will it be?" "Stinky snooze-cumbers," the BFG said. "What is he talking about?" the Queen said. "It sounds like a rude word to me." She turned to the maid and asked, "Mary asked him to serve breakfast for 3. I think it's better to be in the ballroom." "That's the highest ceiling," the BFG said. "I'm afraid you have to go through the door on your hands and knees. I shall send someone to show you the way." The BFG reached up and lifted Sophie onto the window. "You and I is leaving Her Majesty alone to get dressed," he said. "No, leave the little girl here with me," the Queen said. "We'll find something for her to put on. She can't have breakfast in her nightie." The BFG returned Sophie to the bedroom. "Can we have sausages, Your Majesty?" Sophie said, "and bacon and fried eggs." "I think that might be managed," the Queen answered, smiling. Just you wait till you taste it, Sophie said to the BFG. No more snooze-combers from now on. The royal breakfast. There was a frantic scurry among the palace servants, who was ordered to receive from the Queen that a 20-foot giant must be seated with Her Majesty in a great ballroom within the next half hour. The butler, an imposed personage named Mr. Tibbs, was the supreme commander of the palace servants, and he did the best he could in the short time available. A man does not rise to the Queen's butler unless he is gifted with extraordinary ingenuity, adaptability, versatility, dexterity, cunning, sophistication, sagacity, discretion, and a host of other talents that neither you nor I possess. Mr. Tibbs had them all. He was a butler's pantry sipping an early morning's glass of light ale while the order reached him. In a split second he made the following calculations in his head. If a 6-foot man requires a 3-foot high table to eat off, a 24-foot man will require a 12-foot high table. And if a 6-foot man requires a chair with a 2-foot high seat, a 20-foot man will require a chair with an 8-foot high seat. Everything Mr. Tibbs told himself must be multiplied by 4. Two breakfast eggs must become 8. 4 rations of bacon must become 16. 3 pieces of toast must become 12, and so on. 3 calculations about food were immediately passed on to Monsieur Papillon, the royal chef. Mr. Tibbs skimmed into the ballroom, followed by a whole army of footmen. The footmen all kneeled breeches, and every one of them displayed beautiful rounded calves and ankles. There's no way you become a royal footman unless you have a well-turned ankle. It's the first thing they look into when you are interviewed. Push the grand piano into the center of the room, Mr. Tibbs whispered. Butlers never raised their voice. Of the softest piano, 4 footmen moved the piano. Now fetch a large chest of drawers and put it on top of the piano, Mr. Tibbs whispered. 3 other footmen fetched the piano. This would be his chair, Mr. Tibbs whispered. It is exactly 8 feet off the ground. Now we shall make a table upon the gentleman where he may eat his breakfast in comfort. Fetch my 4 very high grandfather clocks. There are plenty of them in the palace. Let each of them be 12 foot high. 16 footmen spread across the palace to find the clocks. They were not easy to carry, and rained 4 footmen to each one. Place the 4 clocks into rectangle 8 by 4 alongside the grand piano. Mr. Tibbs whispered. The footman did so. Now, fetch me the young prince's ping-pong table, Mr. Tibbs whispered. The ping-pong table was carried on. This was done. Now, place the ping-pong table onto the 4 grandfather clocks. Mr. Tibbs whispered. To manage the footmen, he had to stand on step ladders. Mr. Tibbs stood back to survey the new furniture. None of it is in a classical style, he whispered, but it will have to do. He gave orders, and a damask and a tablecloth should be draped over the ping-pong table, and in the end, it looked quite delicate and elegant. At this point, Mr. Tibbs was hesitant. The footmen all stared at him. Butlers never hesitate, not even when they are faced to do the most impossible problems. It is their job to do decisive things all the time. Knives and forks and spoons. Mr. Tibbs was heard to mutter, our cutlery will be like little pins in his hands. But Mr. Tibbs didn't hesitate for long. Tell the head gardener, he whispered, that I require immediately a brand new unused fork and also a spade, and a knife we shall use for the great sword hanging on the wall in the morning room. But clean the sword well first. It was lace used to cut off the head of the King Charles I, and there may still be a little dried blood on the blade. When all this had been accomplished, Mr. Tibbs stood near the center of the ballroom, casting his expert butler's eye over the scene. Had he forgotten anything? He certainly had. What about a coffee cup for the large gentleman? Fetch me, he whispered, the biggest jug you can find in the kitchen. A splendid 1-gallon porcelain water jug, which was brought in and placed on the giant's table beside the garden fork, and the garden spade and the giant great sword. So much for the giant, Mr. Tibbs then had the footman move a small, delicate table and 2 chairs alongside the giant's table. This was for the Queen and Sophie. The fact that the giant's table and chair towered far above the smaller table could not be helped. All these arrangements were not only just compiled when the Queen, now fully dressed into a trim skirt and cashmere cardigan, entered the ballroom holding Sophie by the hand. A pretty blue dress that had once belonged to one of the princesses had been found for Sophie, and to make it look prettier, the Queen had picked up a superb sapphire brooch from her dressing table and had pinned it on the left side of Sophie's chest. The BFG followed behind them, but had an awful job getting through the door. He had to squeeze himself through, but he got through in the end. He had removed his black coat and got rid of his trumpet, and I was wearing ordinary simple clothes. As he walked into the ballroom, he had to stoop quite low to avoid hitting the ceiling. Because of this, he failed to notice an enormous crystal chandelier, crashed went his head into the chandelier. A shower of glass fell onto the poor BFG. Gung hammers and bonk winkles, he cried. What was that? It was Louis V, Queen said, looking slightly put out. He's never been in the house before, Sophie said. Mr. Tibbs scowled. He directed 4 footmen to clear out the mess. With a disdainful little wave of the hand, he indicated to the giant that he should seat himself on the top of the chest drawer, on top of the grand piano. What a piss-whiz flunk-spunking seat, cried the BFG. It's going to be a bug as a snug in a rug up here. Does it always speak like that, the Queen said. Quite often, Sophie said. He gets tangled up with his words. The BFG sat down on his chest of drawers piano and gazed in wonder about the great ballroom. My gumdrops, he said. What a spiffling, whipsy room. Is needing binoculars and telescope to see what is going on the other end. Footmen carried silver trays with fried eggs, sausages, and fried potatoes. At this point, Mr. Tibbs suddenly realized that in order to serve the BFG his 12-foot-high grandfather clock table, he would have to climb on top of the one using tall step ladders. What's more, he must do it balancing a small warm plate on the palm of one hand and holding a gigantic silver coffee pot on the other. A normal man would have flinched at the thought of it, but good butlers never flinch. He went up and up and up, while the Queen and Sophie watched him with great interest. It is possible they were both secretly hoping he would lose his balance and go crashing to the floor, but good butlers never crash. At the top of the ladder, Mr. Tibbs balanced like the acrobat, pouring the BFG's coffee and placing the enormous plate before him. On the other plate were the 8 eggs, 12 sausages, and 60 rashers of bacon, and a heap of fried potato. What is this, your majesty? The BFG asked, piercing the Queen. He had never eaten anything except snooze cumbers before in his life, Sophie explained. They taste revolting. They don't seem to have stunned his growth, the Queen said. The BFG grabbed the garden spade and scooped up the eggs and sausages, bacon, and potatoes in one go and shoved them in his mouth. By God, Goose, he cried. This stuff is making snooze cumbers taste like Swatch wallop. The Queen glanced up, frowning. Mr. Tibbs looking down at his toes and his lips moving in silent prayer. That was only one itchy little bite, the BFG said. Is there any more of this delicious grubble in the cupboard, Magister? Tibbs, the Queen said, showing true, real hospitality. Fetch the gentleman another dozen fried eggs and a dozen sausages. Mr. Tibbs swam out of the room, muttering unspeakable words to himself and holding his brow with a white handkerchief. The BFG lifted the huge jug and took a swallow. Ouch, he cried, blowing a mouthful across the bathroom. Please, what is a horrible swig pill I is drinking, Magister? It's coffee, the Queen told him. Freshly roasted. It's fulsome, the BFG cried out. Where's the frobscottle? The what? Delumptious frizzle frobscottle, the BFG answered. Everyone must be drinking frobscottle for breakfast, Magister. Then we can all be whiz-popping happily together afterwards. What does that mean? The Queen said, frowning at Sophie. What is whiz-popping? Sophie kept a very straight face. The BFG, she said. There's no frobscottle here, and whiz-popping is strictly forbidden. What? Cried the BFG. No frobscottle, no whiz-popping, no glumptious music, no boom-boom? Absolutely not, Sophie told him firmly. If he wants to sing, please don't stop him, the Queen said. He doesn't want to sing, Sophie said. He just wants to make music, the Queen went on. Shall I send him a violin? No, your Majesty, Sophie said. He's only joking. A sly little smile crossed the BFG's face. Listen, he said, peering down at Sophie. If they haven't any frobscottle here in the palace, I can still go whiz-popping perfectly well without it if I is trying hard enough. No, cried Sophie, don't. You're not to. I beg you. Music is very good for the digestion, the Queen said. When I'm up in Scotland, they play the bagpipes there, outside the window, while I'm eating. Do you play something? It was Her Majesty's permission, cried the BFG, and all at once he let out a fly with a whiz-popper that sounded as though a bomb had exploded in the room. The Queen jumped. Whoopee! Shouted the BFG. That is better than bagpipes, is it not, Magister? It took the Queen a few seconds to get over the shock. I prefer the bagpipes, she said, but she couldn't stop herself smiling. During the next 20 minutes, a whole relay of footmen were kept busy hurrying to and from the kitchen, carrying 3rd helpings and 4th helpings and 5th helpings of fried and sausage eggs for the ravenous, delighted BFG. When the BFG had consumed his 72nd fried egg, Mr. Tibbs stood up the Queen. He bent low on the waist and whispered in her ear, Chef sends his apologies, Your Majesty, and he says he has no more eggs in the kitchen. What's wrong with the hens? The Queen said. Nothing's wrong with the hens, Your Majesty, Mr. Tibbs said. Then tell them to lay more, the Queen said. She looked up the BFG. Have some toast and marmalade while you're waiting, she said to him. The toast is finished, Mr. Tibbs whispered, and the chefs say there's no more bread. Tell them to bake more, the Queen said. While all this was going, Sophie had been telling the Queen everything, absolutely everything about her visit to the giant country. The Queen listened, appalled. When Sophie had finished, the Queen looked up to the BFG. He was sitting high above her. He was now eating a sponge cake. Big friendly giant, she said. Last night those men in eagle boots came to England. Can you remember where they went before the night? The BFG put a whole round sponge cake into his mouth and chewed it slowly while he thought about this question. Yes, Magister, he said. I do think I was remembering what they said they were going to the night before last. They was galloping off to Sweden for the sweet and sour taste. Fetch me a telephone, the Queen commanded. Mr. Tibbs placed the instrument on the table. The Queen lifted the receiver. Get me the King of Sweden, she said. Good morning, the Queen said. Is everything right in Sweden? Everything is terrible, the King said. There's a panic in the capital. 2 nights ago, 26 of my loyal subjects disappeared. My whole country is in panic. 26 loyal subjects were all eaten by giants, the Queen said. Apparently they taste like Swedes. Why do they taste like Swedes, the King asked. Because the Swedes of Sweden have a sweet and sour taste. So says the BFG, the Queen said. I don't know what you're talking about, the Queen said, growing testy. It's hardly a joking matter when one loyal subjects are being eaten like popcorn. They've eaten mine as well, the Queen said. Who's they, for heaven's sakes? Giants, the Queen said. Look here, the King said. Are you feeling alright? It's been a rough morning, the Queen said. First, I had a hard nightmare, and the maid dropped my breakfast, and now I've got a giant on my piano. You'll need a doctor real quick. I'll be alright, the Queen said. I must go now. Thanks for the help. She placed the receiver. Your BFG is right, the Queen said to Sophie. Those 9 man-eating brutes did go to Sweden. It's horrible, Sophie said. Please stop them, Your Majesty. I'd like to make one more check before I go to the troops, the Queen said. Once more, she looked up to the BFG. He was eating donuts now, popping them in and out of his mouth 10 at a time, like peas. Think hard, BFG, she said. Where did those horrid giants say they were galloping off to 3 nights ago? The BFG thought hard and hard. Who? He cried. Yes, I remember. Where? asked the Queen. He said he was off to Baghdad. As they were galloping past my cave, British Ether is waving his arms and shouting at me. I was off to Baghdad, and I was going to Baghdad and Mom and every one of their 10 children as well. Once more the Queen lifted the receiver. Get me the Lord Mayor of Baghdad, she said. If they don't have a Lord Mayor, get me the next best thing. In 5 seconds our voice was on the line. Here's the Sultan of Baghdad speaking, the voice said. Listen, Sultan, the Queen said. Did anything unpleasant happen to your city 3 nights ago? Every night unpleasant things are happening in Baghdad, the Sultan said. We are chopping off people's head like you are chopping parsley. I've never chopped parsley in my life, the Queen said. I want to know if anyone has disappeared recently in Baghdad. Only my uncle, Salif Oran al-Rashid, the Sultan said. He disappeared from his bed 3 nights ago, together with his wife and 10 children. There he was, cried the BFG, whose wonderful ears enabled her to hear what the Sultan was saying to the Queen on the telephone. Flesh Lump Eater did that one. He went off to Baghdad to bag Dad and Mom and all the little kiddos. The Queen replaced the receiver. That proves it, she said, looking up the BFG. Your story apparently is quite true. Summon the head of the army and the head of the Air Force immediately. The plan. The head of the army and the head of the Air Force stood at attention before the Queen's breakfast table. Sophie was still in her seat and the BFG was still high up on the crazy perch. It took only the Queen 5 minutes to explain the situation to the military. I knew there was something going on, Your Majesty, the head of the army said. For the last 10 years, we have been getting reports from nearly every country in the world about people disappearing mysteriously in the night. We had only the other day from Panama. For the hatty taste, cried the BFG, and the one from Wellington in New Zealand, and the head of the army. For the booty flavour, cried the BFG. What is he talking about, the head of the Air Force said. Work it out yourself, the Queen said. What time is it? 10 a.m. In 8 hours, the 9 bloodthirsty brutes will be galloping off to the countries. They have to be stopped. We must act fast. We'll bomb the blighters, shouted the head of the Air Force. We'll mow them down with machine guns, cried the head of the army. I do not approve of murder, the Queen said. But they are murderers themselves, cried the head of the army. That is no reason why we should follow the example, the Queen said. 2 wrongs don't make a right, and 2 rights don't make a left, cried the BFG. "We must bring them back alive," the Queen said. "How?" the two military men said together. "They are all 50 feet high. They knock us down like ninepins." "Wait," cried the BFG. "Hold your horseflies. Keep your skirts on. I think I know the answer." "Let him speak," the Queen said. "Every afternoon," the BFG said, "all the giants is in the land of Nori." "I can't understand a word this fellow says," the head of the army snapped. "Why doesn't he speak clearly?" "He means the land of the Nod," Sophie said. "It's pretty obvious." "Exactly," cried the BFG. "Every afternoon all these 9 giants lie on the ground snoozling away in a very deep sleep. There's always resting like that before there's guzzling off to guzzle another helping of human beings." "Go on," they said. "So what?" "So what you soldiers have to do is creep to the giants while they are still in the land of Noddy and tie their arms and legs with ropes and wonking chains." "Brilliant," the Queen said. "That's all very well," and the head of the army. "But how do we get the brutes back there?" "We can't load 50-foot giants onto trucks. Shoot them on the spot, that's what I say." The BFG looked down from his lofty perch and said, this time to the head of the Air Force, "You're having belly poppers, is you not?" "Is he being rude?" the head of the Air Force said. "He means helicopters," Sophie told him. "Then why didn't he say so? Of course we have helicopters." "We've seen big belly poppers," asked the BFG. "Very big ones," the head of the Air Force said. "But no helicopter is big enough to get a giant like that inside." "You don't need to put him inside," the BFG said. "You sling him underneath the belly of your belly popper and carry him like a torpedo." "Like a what?" cried the head of the Air Force. "Like a torpedo," Sophie said. "Could you do that, Marshal?" the Queen said. "Well, I suppose we could," the head of the Air Force, admittingly grudgingly. Then get cracking," the Queen said. "You'll need 9 helicopters, 1 for each giant." "Where's this place?" the Air Force man said to the BFG. "I presume you can pinpoint it on the map." "Pinpoint," said the BFG. "Map?" I was never hearing these words before. Has the Air Force been talking slush bungle? The Air Marshal's face turned to the colour of a ripe plum. He was not being used to being told that he was still a flush bungle. The Queen, with her unusual tact and good sense, came to the rescue. "BFG," she said, "can you tell us more about where this giant country is?" "No, Majesty," the BFG said. "Not on my alley." "Then we're jiggered," cried the Army General. "This is ridiculous," cried the Air Marshal. "You must not give up so easily," the BFG said. "The first itchy bobsicle you meet, and you begin shouting your biff squiggle." The Army General was no more used to being insulted than the Air Marshal. His face began to swell with fury, and his cheeks blow on until they looked like 2 huge ripe tomatoes. "Your Majesty," he cried, "we are dealing with a lunatic. That has nothing more to do with a ridiculous operation." The Queen, who was used to tantrums of her senior officials, ignored them completely. "BFG," she said, "would you please tell these rather dim-witted characters exactly what to do?" "A pleasure, Your Majesty," said the BFG. "Now listen to me carefully, the 2 bottle hoggers." The military man began to twitch, but they stayed put. "I was not having the foggiest idea where giant country is in the world," the BFG said, "but I was always able to gallop there. I gallop forwards and backwards from giant country every night to blow my dreams into little chitties' bedrooms. I was knowing the way very well. So all you is having to do, put your 9 big belly poppers up in the air and let them follow me as I gallop along." "How long will the journey take?" the Queen asked. "If we is leaving now," the BFG said, "we will be arriving in Giant's country this afternoon." "Splendid," the Queen said. Then turning to the 2 military men, she said, "Prepare to leave immediately." The head of the army, who was feeling pretty miffed by the whole business, said, "That's very all well, Your Majesty, but what are we going to do with the blighters once they've got them?" "Don't you worry about that," the Queen told him. "We'll be ready for them. Hurry up and go now." "If it pleases Your Majesty," Sophie said, "I shall like to ride with the BFG to accompany him." "Where will you sit?" the Queen said. "In his ear," Sophie said. "Sit on, BFG." The BFG got down to his high chair. He picked up Sophie in his fingers. He swiveled his right ear until it was parallel to the ground. Then he placed Sophie gently inside it. The heads of the army and the Air Force stood there goggling. The Queen smiled. "You really are rather wonderful, giant," she said. "Majesty," the BFG said, "I was wishing to ask a very special thing from you." "What is it?" the Queen said. "Could I please bring back here the belly poppers, all of my collection of dreams? They've taken me years and years to collect, and I was not wishing to lose them." "Why, of course," the Queen said. "I just wish you to safe a journey." Capture. The BFG had made 1,000 journeys to and from giant country over the years, but he had never in his life made one quite like this, with 9 huge helicopters roaring along his head. He had never before traveled in broad daylight either. He hadn't dared to, but this was different. Now he was doing it for the Queen of England herself, and he was frightened of nobody. As he galloped across the British Isles over the helicopters, thundering above him, people stood, and he's leading to disaster, cried the people stood and gaped and wondered what on earth was going on. They had never seen the likes of it before, and they never would again. Every now and then the pilots of the helicopters would catch a glimpse of a small girl wearing glasses, crouching in the giant's ear and waving to them. They would always wave back. The pirates marveled at the giant's speed and the way he leaped across the rivers and over the houses. But they hadn't seen anything. Be careful to hang on tight, the BFG said. We was going fast as a fizzle crump. The BFG changed into his famous top gear, and all at once he began to fly forward, as though there were springs in his legs and rockets in his toes. He was skimming over the earth like some magical hop skip, and I jumped over his feet, hardly ever touching the ground as usual. Sophie had to crouch low in the crevice of his ear to save herself from being swept clean away. The 9 pilots in their helicopters suddenly realized they were being left behind. The giant was streaking ahead. They opened their throttles to full speed, and even though they were only just able to keep up, in the leading machine, the head of the Air Force was sitting back beside the pilot. He had a world atlas on his knees, and he kept staring first at the atlas, then at the ground, before trying to figure out where they were going. Frantically, he turned the pages of the atlas. "Where in the devil are we going?" he cried. "I haven't got the foggiest idea," the pilot answered. "The Queen's orders was to follow the giant, and that's exactly what I'm doing." The pilot was a young Air Force officer with a bushy moustache. He was very proud of his moustache, and he was also quite fearless, and he loved adventure. He thought this was a super adventure. "It's fun going to new places," he said. "New places?" shouted the head of the Air Force. "What the blazes do you mean, new places?" "The place we're flying over now isn't in the atlas." "It is," the pilot said. "You're darn right it isn't in the atlas," cried the head of the Air Force. "We've flown off the last page." "I expected the old giant to know where he's going," the young pilot said. "He's leading us to disaster," the head of the Air Force said. He was shaking with fear. In fact, behind him sat the head of the army. He was even more terrified. "You don't mean to tell me we've gone right at the atlas," he cried, leaning forward to look. "That's exactly what I'm telling you," cried the Air Force man. "Look for yourself. Here's the very last map of the flaming atlas. We went off over an hour ago." He turned the page. As in atlases, there were 2 completely blank pages in the very end. "So now we must be somewhere here," he said, putting finger onto finger. "Where's here?" cried the head of the army. The young pilot was still grinning broadly. He said to them, "That's why they put 2 blank pages at the back of the atlas. They're for new countries. You're meant to fill in them yourselves." The head of the Air Force glanced down and cried, "All the trees are dead and all the rocks are blue. The giants have stopped," the young pilot said. "He's waving us down." The pilots throttled back to the engine, and all 9 helicopters landed safely on the great yellow wasteland. Then each of them lowered a ramp with his belly. "I don't see any giants," the head of the army said. "The giants is all right over there," the BFG told them. "But if you're taking those slush-buckling noise belly boppers any closer, all the giants is waking up at once, and the pop goes the weasel." "So you want us to proceed by jeep?" the head of the army said. "Yes," the BFG said. "You must all be very hushly quiet. No roaring of motors, no shouting, no mucking about, no piggery joke." The BFG, with Sophie still in the air, trotted forward, and the Jerps followed close behind. Suddenly, the most dreadful rumbling noise was heard by everyone. The head of the army went pea grace and greens. "Those are guns," he cried. "Those is battle-raging guns somewhere ahead of us. Turn back, the lot of you. Let's get out of here." "Pig scriffle," the BFG said. "Those noises is not guns." "Of course they're guns," shouted the head of the army. "I'm a military man, and I know what a gun is." "Those is the giants snortling in their sleep," the BFG said. "I is a giant myself, and I know a giant snortle when I is hearing one." "Are you quite sure?" the army man said anxiously. "Positive," the BFG said. Proceed cautiously, the army man ordered. They all moved on. Then they saw them. Even at distance, they were enough to scare the daylights out of the soldiers. But when they got closer and saw what the giants really looked like, they began to sweat with fear. 9 fearsome, half-naked, 50-feet brutes lay sprawled over the ground in the various grotesque attitudes of sleep, and the sound of their snoring was indeed like gunfire in a battlefield. The BFG raised a hand. The jeeps all stopped, and the soldiers got out. "What if one of them wakes?" whispered the head of the army. His knees knocked him together with fear. "If any of them is awake, he'll gobble you down before you can jack a knife," the BFG answered, grinning hugely. "Me is the only one who won't be gobbled up, because giants is never eating giants."
Me and Sophie is the only safe ones because I's hiding her if that happens. The head of the army took several paces to rear. So did the head of the Air Force. They climbed rather quickly back into the jeep and ready to make a fast getaway if necessary. Go forward, men, the head of the army said. Go forward and do your duty bravely. The soldiers crept up with their ropes and chains, and all of them trembled mightily. None of them dared to speak a word. The BFG with Sophie, now settled on the palm of her hand, stood near them by watching the operation. To give the soldiers their due, they were extremely courageous. There were 6 well-trained, efficient men working on each giant, and within 10 minutes, 8 out of the 9 giants had been jostled up. The 9th had to be Flesh Lump Eater, who was causing trouble for soldiers because he was lying with his right arm tucked underneath his enormous body. It was impossible to tie his wrists and arms together without very first getting the arm from underneath them. Very cautiously, the 6 soldiers who were working on the Flesh Lump Eater began to pull at the huge arm, trying to release it. The Flesh Lump Eater opened his eyes and said, "Which of you foul pests is wiggling my arm? Is it you, Watson Manhugger?" Suddenly he saw the soldiers. In a flash, he was sitting up and he looked around him. He saw more soldiers. With a roar, he leapt to his feet. The soldiers, petrified with fear, froze where they were. They had no weapons with them. The head of the army put his jeep into reverse. "Human beings!" the Flesh Lump Eaters yelled. "What are you all flush-bunking or some half-baked beans doing in our country?" He made a grab at the soldier and swept him up in his hand. "I's having early supper today," he shouted, holding the poor, screaming soldiers at his arm and roaring with laughter. Sophie, standing on the palm of the BFG's hand, was watching horror-struck. "Do something," she cried. "Quick, before he eats him." "Put that human being down," the BFG shouted. The Flesh Lump Eater stared at BFG. "What is you doing with all those grot twiglets?" he bellowed. "You's making me very suspicious." The BFG made a rush at the Flesh Lump Eater, but the colossal 54-foot giant knocked him down, over with a flick of his free arm. At the same time, Sophie fell off the BFG's palm and on the ground. Her mind was racing. She must do something. She must. She remembered the sapphire brooch the queen had pinned onto her chest. Quickly, she undid it, and it guzzled. "You nice and slow," the Flesh Lump Eater was saying to the soldier. "You I's guzzling 10 or 20 more of you diggly little maggots down there. You's not getting away because I's galloping 55 times faster than you." Sophie ran up behind the Flesh Lump Eater. She was holding the brooch between her fingers. When she was right up close to the great, naked, hairy legs, she ran the 3-inch long pin of a brooch as hard as she could into the Flesh Lump Eater's right ankle. It went deep into the flesh and stayed there. The giant roared of pain and jumped high into the sky. He dropped the soldier and made a grab for his ankle. The BFG, knowing what a coward the Flesh Lump Eater was, saw his chance. "You was bitten by the snake," he shouted. "I see it's beating you." It was a frightened, poisonous viper. It was a deadly, dangerous viper. "Save our souls," bellowed the Flesh Lump Eater. "Sound the crumpets. I is better by a skiptious, venomous, some spin-screen viper." He flopped to the ground and sat there howling his head off, clutching his legs. His fingers felt the brooch. "The teeth of the deadly viper is sticking into me," he yelled. "I's feeling the teeth sticking to my anklet." The BFG saw his second chance. "You must get out of there," he cried. "Otherwise you is deadly out of the duck soup. I's helping you." The BFG knouted down to the Flesh Lump Eater. "You must grab your anklet very tight with both hands," he said. "Then you will stop the poisonous juices from venomous vipers going up your legs into your heart. Now close your eyes and grit your teeth, and look out to the heavens and say your prayers, while I is taking out the teeth of the venomous viper," the BFG said. The terrified Flesh Lump Eater did exactly as he was told. The BFG signaled for some rope. A soldier rushed over to him. With both the Flesh Lump Eater's hands gripping his ankles, it was a lot easier for the BFG to tie his ankles and hands with a tight knot. "I is pulling out the frightsome viper's teeth," the BFG said as he pulled the knot tight. "Do it quickly," shouted the Flesh Lump Eater, "before I is frizzled to death." "There we is," said the BFG. "You can look now." While the Flesh Lump Eater saw that he was dressed up like a turkey, he gave a yowl so loud that the heavens trembled. He rolled and he wriggled and he fought, but he did nothing. Well done you," said the BFG, smiling down at the little girl. "You're saving our lives." "Will you please get the brooch back for me?" Sophie said. "It belongs to the queen." The BFG pulled the beautiful brooch out of the Flesh Lump Eater's ankle. The BFG and Flesh Lump Eater howled.
The BFG wiped the pin and handed it to Sophie. Curiously, not only did one of the 8 snoring giants had woken. When you was only sleeping 1 or 2 hours a day, you were sleeping extra double deep, the BFG explained. They heard the army and the Air Force drove forward once again into the jeep. Her Majesty will be very pleased with me, they heard the army said. I should probably get a medal. What's the next move? Now you is all driving to my cave to load my bottle of dreams. We can't waste time with that rubbish, the army general said. As the Queen's orders, Sophie said. She was now back on the BFG's hand. So the 9 jeeps drove across the BFG's cave and the great dream loaded operation began. There were 50 jars in total, 50,000 jars in total to be loaded up, more than 5,000 to each jeep, and it took over an hour to finish the job. While the soldiers were landing the dreams and loading the dreams, the BFG and Sophie disappeared over the mountains on a mysterious errand. When they came back, the BFG had the size of a small house slung to his shoulder. What's that you've got there? The head said. Curiosity is killing the cat, the BFG said, and he turned away from the silly man. When he was sure that all his precious dreams had been safely loaded into the jeep, the BFG said, now, we is driving back to Belly Boppers and picking up the fights from giants. The jeeps drove back to the country in helicopters. The 50,000 dreams were carried jar by jar onto the helicopters, but the soldiers climbed back on board. But the BFG and Sophie stayed on the ground. Then they all returned to where the 9 giants were lying. It's a fine sight to see them, those great air machines hovering up in the skies. It was an even finer sight to see the giants being woken up by the terrified thunders of engines overhead. The finest thing of all was to observe those 9 hideous brutes squirming and twisting above on the ground like a mass of massive snakes. The 9 giant carrying helicopters each chose a separate giants to carry and hover directly over. Very strong steel hawsers with each hook on the end of them were lowered from the front and the rear in each helicopter. The BFG quickly secured the hooks to the giants. Then very slowly the chains were winched up. The giants roared and bellowed, but there was nothing they could do. The BFG with Sophie once more resting. It was an amazing spectacle. Those 9 helicopters wiggled around the sky. Each was struggled up 50 foot long under the slung underneath it. The giants themselves must have found it an interesting experience. They never stopped bellowing, but their howls were drowned by the noise of the engines. When it began to come dark, the helicopter switched on powerful searchlights and trained them onto the galloping giant so to keep him in sight. They flew right through the night and arrived in England just as dawn was breaking. Feeding time. While the giants were being captured, a tremendous battle and hustle was going on in England. Every earth digger and mechanical convenience in the country had been mobilized to dig the colossal hole in which the 9 giants were to permanently be imprisoned. 10,000 men and 10,000 machines worked ceaselessly through the night under powerful arc lights, and the massive task was only completed in time. The hole itself was about twice the size of a football field deep and 500 feet deep. The walls were perpendicular. Engineers had calculated that there was no way a giant could escape once he was put in. Even if all the giants were to stand on each other's shoulders, the topmost giant would still be some 50 feet from the top of the hole. The 9 giants carried helicopters hovered down from the massive pit. The giants one by one were lowered to the floor, but they were still dressed up, and now came the tricky business of releasing them from their bonds. Nobody wanted to go down and do this because nobody wanted to be there the moment a giant was freed. He was sure to turn to the wretched person who had freed him and gobble him up. As usual, the BFG had answered. I was told before, he said. Giants is never eating giants. So I was going down and I shall untie them myself before you can say, Rack John Robinson. With thousands of fascinated spectators, including the Queen, peered down into the pit, the BFG was lowered on the rope. One by one, he was released. They stood up and stretched and stiffened their limbs. Why is they putting up down in that grub sludge hole? They shouted. Because you is guzzling human beings, the BFG answered. I was always warning you not to do it, and you was never taking the titchiest bit of notice. In that case, the flesh lump eater said, I think we is guzzling you instead. The BFG grabbed and dangled the rope and was hoisted out of the pit just in time. The great bulging sack he had brought back with him from the giant's country lay at the top of the pit. What's in there? The Queen asked. The BFG put an arm into the sack and pulled out a gigantic black and white stripped object from the size of a man. Snooze compass, he said. This is the repulsant snooze comer, Magister, and this is all we is going to give the great digestive giants from now on. May I taste it? The Queen asked. Don't, Magister, don't, cried the BFG. It's tasting of chocolate-filled pickle squabble. With that, he tossed the snooze comet down to the giants below. "There's your supper," he shouted. "Here's a munch on that." He fished out more snooze comets from the sack, and he threw them down. The giants below howled and cursed. The BFG laughed. "It serves them right and center and left. What will be fed them on when the snooze comets are all used up?" "They're never used up, Your Majesty," said the BFG, smiling. "I is also bringing up the sack a whole bundle of snooze comet plants, which is I is giving with your permission to the royal gardener to put in the soil. Then we is having an everlasting supply of the repulsive food to feed the third blasting giants on." "What a clever fellow you are," the Queen said. "You are not very well educated, but you are really not a fool. I can see that."